Very good. Okay, so the first thing is the hearing of visitors, public comment. Mrs. Cherry?
My name is Mary Cherry, and I'm the president of the Lenox Education Association. I have two things. One is a question, and then I guess the second is a question as well. My first is, I'm curious, and I know, Bob, you and I had spoken, I'm curious about the meeting in person. This is your first time meeting in person, so welcome back to the town hall. But I'm curious about the accessibility and transparency that we lose without having a Zoom option. And I know you and I have spoken about this before. And I would really say from our membership, we really would like the convenience, the accessibility, and the transparency that the Zoom option allowed. I think once you went to the webinar format, it was much easier to manage. And I think it's not impossible to manage both a live and a Zoom meeting, especially in a webinar format. But if you need any tips on that, I know some people who could help you. So that's the first thing I'm really wondering, and I know you might not have an answer for us tonight, but we really are advocating for that, not only for the LEA, but for our parents who aren't in the district, and our choice parents who would find it much more difficult to attend a live meeting. The second is a question that there may be a time in the agenda, especially when you're talking about the COVID memo later on in the agenda, that I might ask to be recognized, so I ask for the courtesy of your recognition if I raise my hand. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of what we might do going forward with meetings, if we continue to meet in person, we're looking at the option of seeing what we can do with this, Zoom, and maybe an OWL camera such that, and CTSB has sent me a bunch of videos of other towns and what they're doing, and I haven't looked at them all, and not everyone's in love with what each town's been doing, but somebody must be doing it pretty well in such a way that people at home can see all of us, or at least the speaker, while we can see the Zoom participants and so we didn't have time for this meeting to make that possible, but we're hoping between now and August 30th that maybe we'll have at least a better idea of what might be possible.
And Bob, may I interject on that? The question I also have, it's nice to be with you all, but it's a little weird. And as we're looking at the fluctuations of the numbers we're seeing, unfortunately, after July 4th, is whether or not, this is cozy, right? And we have that big auditorium room downstairs. So the question becomes whether if we're looking at technology, whether before we set on a situation, we look at whether or not we can be downstairs. Because again, that puts us in person, maybe allows us to separate chairs to have a little bit more of the intimacy of non-masking, but not being quite so cozy as my buddy Bob here. Not that I don't like it, but I think realistically, we have the space downstairs in a public setting, so maybe we can speak with Mr. Ketchen and talk about whether we can have our meeting there, and maybe with a screen. I mean, there is a lot of great new technology that we could do. I experienced a board meeting that was a hybrid, and so we had people on the screen, and then we had people on the table, and I think it shows good leadership to try to do that. I also think that what we want to encourage as far as a strategic plan is much more community knowledge. I've had a lot of people express to me their concerns that it's like, yes, everything's posted, but it becomes practical obscurity if you're kind of not in the school community and used to the schedule. So being able to click on and see the meeting in live action rather than looking for the past archived meetings keeps the public up to date on things that they care about. And so it's maybe something we'll start and we'll perfect as we go along.
Yeah, and I want to also take this opportunity to introduce to the viewing public our new superintendent, Mark Gosselin, for his first school committee meeting, and the viewing public and obviously you people here. Maybe meeting him for the first time. Some of you probably have met him before. Welcome. Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay. Correspondence. The correspondence that I have really comes from Matt Lenahan, who's a parent. I don't know grades his kids are in. But he's been an advocate for LMMHS to host the Southern Berkshire Lacrosse boys team. Evidently Lee, who's been hosting it for a number of years, is not going to host boys any longer. They continue to host girls. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that I received a proposal and some, I spoke to him actually, June or July, I don't remember when it was exactly, about the proposal. He's been in touch with David Pugh, our athletic director, and I want to make sure that before the lacrosse season is in the spring. So I don't think there's the immediacy to make the decision, but it'll be on our agenda for August 30. And we may wish to make a decision then, but I don't think there's the incredible urgency to do it at that moment, but we might. I mean, it's possible we could if we're ready to. But I want to make sure we have David Pugh's input. He's had some conversations. I just sent around this afternoon, a copy of the proposal to the school committee members so they could see, what it was, what the correspondence has been around it. So that's the correspondence I have. I think they feel they could use the upper field down at the high school, and it's big enough and good enough shape to use for a full size or pretty close to full size lacrosse field. But anyway, that's all stuff that we can talk with them and with David Pugh about at a future meeting, but I just did want to acknowledge that we received that correspondence. Okay, board report. School committee meeting minutes, June 14th.
Mr. Chairman, I move to accept the minutes of the meeting of June 14th, 2021.
And is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. And any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none. Call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We don't have to do
Don't
roll
have
call
to do a roll
anymore.
call right now.
Yeah, it's weird.
Like roll call.
Yeah.
We're all here.
Yeah, it's bad. No, we're getting out of the habit.
What do they say how long it takes to change a habit? 6?
Yeah.
Some people say 6 weeks. For me, it's a good 4 months.
Okay, superintendent's report.
All right.
Dr. Gosselin.
Well, thank you
Welcome.
for the welcome. I appreciate it. And nice to meet everyone for the first time if I haven't met you. Been making the rounds and meeting with different folks around town, so it's been wonderful to do that as part of my entry planning and helping me acclimate to the district and have the opportunity to immerse myself in the community. It's been wonderful. So that's been really fun and exciting. And I know I have meetings with a few of you here next few weeks, so I'm looking forward to those too. Summer in schools is a really busy time. You might not realize it, right? The kids aren't here, but there's still a lot of action and activity. In some ways, it's kind of sad because you don't get to see the buildings when, some parts of them look better than ever, like the fields and things outside are gorgeous right now. Spent some time over at Morris checking out the summer program. And man, that was a flurry of activity, so much going on. And so I think we have to give a lot of thanks to Brenda and her team and the work they've done to get that off the ground. We have 59 total students that have participated in that program. So that's pretty impressive in a very short period of time to be able to put that together, get the messaging out, get students enrolled, and then bring them in for the opportunity to learn. And so the day I was over visiting, I saw some children learning about the culture and climate in Brazil, and so that was really neat to see them engaging in that, doing a virtual field trip. Other students were reading and writing, some were doing math, and so it was vibrant. And I like the way it's structured because it's academic, but it's also balanced with a lot of joy, which personally is important to me. So the kids also have a chance to get outside and play and have some fun too. So it almost feels like a summer camp, and so it's really been well done. So that was great to see. Likewise, LMMHS has a program, sorry, it's a mouthful, that has 54 students that are participating in grades 6 through 11. And they are participating largely in math and ELA, but again, a lot of attendance for a secondary program. Some students are working on their summer reading and writing and improving in those areas, and then other students are working on anything from 7th grade advanced math all the way through getting ready for calculus. So really been exciting to see how popular both those programs were and how quickly we were able to turn them around as a district. I think a real testament to the administrative staff. So that's the update about the summer programming. One thing that's also we would like to entertain tonight is if the board would indulge us, we would ask for a vote to change the school calendar. There's been a minor adjustment. We've been asked to participate, and this is kind of came in under the wire after the calendar was made, but there had previously been a day that was set aside for a county-wide PD day where all the school districts across Berkshire County would get together and have an opportunity to engage in some site professional learning at different locations around the county. And so in talks with the teachers, this is something that's really been meaningful to them, and they've had an opportunity to get out and get outside of their bubble, so to speak, and also have an opportunity, if they're the only teacher that teaches a particular subject, to get together with others across the region and have some community and conversations around that. So we thought it was a great idea. We thought it would be wonderful for Lenox to participate. And so in order to do that, we have to make a shift to the calendar, which would mean that November 2nd would have to be reassigned as a day for students as a no school day. Staff obviously would still be working. And then that day would have to be added back on for students at the end of the school year. So if that's something that the board would approve, we would ask them to please vote on that if that's something that is of interest to the school committee on the board. We called the board previously. Also, I'd like to share with folks that are here tonight an update on our new hires.
Well, did you want us to actually take the vote right now?
If you want to do it right now, that's fine.
Yeah. I think it'd be good just to kind of do it.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend the calendar for the 2021-2022 school year to indicate that the November 2nd day is a day off for students and a full day of professional development for faculty and staff as appropriate, and then that day be, I assume, added, that's the 17th, which would make it the 180th day, or the 20th if it's the 185th day. 185th day would be the 20th. Oh, I'm sorry. So actually, if we look at that,
it should be the 27th.
the 27th, right?
Well, is the amendment already in here? Because my calendar already indicates that November 2nd is already
Right.
no school, so is that day already added into the end?
No,
It is
the draft.
Okay.
right. The 185th day would actually be the 27th.
Right,
Because of the holiday, Juneteenth.
right, exactly.
So
Did I not get the right calendar in there?
I think we just did 185th day is the 24th, which would be what it would be if we didn't amend to June 17th as being the last day of school. So it would mean the last day of school would be June 27th,
the 185th day.
if we used all the days correctly. Sorry.
Of course, you have to set a calendar with those, the 180th and 185th days. Obviously, if we get a lot of snow days, we go even further. That's not guaranteed to be the last day, but you do have to set a calendar that has 180 and 185 days on it.
Right.
Okay, so we
So
have
the
a-
motion would be for the 17th to be the last day of school, the 180th day of school, and the 27th would be the 185th day of school if necessary, in light of whether we took enough snow days or not. Correct? Is that what you need?
Yeah. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just ask, I'm a little bit concerned just by the number of PD days that we now have, looking from October, November, December. There's day off week of the 11th, half day week of the 20th, now day off week of the 2nd, day off week of the 11th, Thanksgiving, day off week of the 3rd. Almost every week now has a half day or a day off. And so, I guess this sounds like a terrific opportunity. I would just ask, is there an opportunity to trade it off with anything else, even just a half day, if we're adding a new full day, as opposed to breaking up yet another of the fall weeks?
I have an idea. I'm just kidding. Table it.
I mean, I guess that's a question for you, Dr. Gosselin.
Yeah.
If there's any discussion of that, or if it's important to add it as an additional day.
So I know when you look at the calendar, it appears that there's a lot of days off, but they're not all devoted for professional development. And so I think that's where, to be honest, I think we actually have a very limited opportunity for professional development in the calendar as it is. And it's something that I know is important to our faculty and staff to support their professional growth. So, I mean, we can certainly look if there's an opportunity to trade off another day. But many of the other days that we have, it's, you know, conferences and these types of things, so they're not necessarily all PD days that we're looking at, I don't think.
Yeah.
So it's tough to make a trade, but we can certainly look at it and come back with another revised calendar, you know, but we do want to try to get one out to the public soon, because parents are going to need it to plan as well.
Okay, yeah, and it may not be for this year then, just looking at, for instance, if we're adding a full day on the 2nd, I would think it would make sense to take off the half day on the 20th. So at least as we're preparing the calendar in future years, I think both for kids and frankly for parents, having such a consistent breakup in schedule is certainly challenging.
And I think that's appointment well made. And I think one of the things that I have some concerns with is half days are also really tough to deliver PD, because by the time the students are finally released and faculty have an opportunity to you know, take care of their last minute things they need to do, effectively we don't have very much time left. So maybe in the future it might be prudent to think about marrying some of those half days to have some full days, so that we can do a deep dive and really take on some work. I mean, we have a strategic plan that has a lot that is asking of us, and so I think in order to satisfy those 8, you know, big ideas in the strategic plan, it would be nice to have some time to really dive in deep in some of those areas. So I think it's a point well made. I don't know that it would totally make sense to do it now at this point with, you know, being so close to the school year. But again, if that's what the committee would want, we can certainly take another look at it.
Mrs. Cherry?
I just have a comment actually. When you're looking into the 180 school days for the students, just our contract is 184 for the faculty, so just to make sure that that stays. And I think that's where those half a days come in. They're able to get PD in without adding a day. That would have to be negotiated.
So, are there any other questions about the calendar? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. So thank you for that. I think that is a wonderful opportunity for us to re-engage with our partners around the community and around the region. So we're really looking forward to that. So this has been an unusual year, right? So one of the things I'm always told about Lenox is this is a place that people come and no one ever leaves. And I think that's generally true. You look at the tenure of our staff. But it's been an unusual summer where we have had a number of opportunities to welcome some new staff aboard, and so I just wanted to give an update on who some of those folks are. So we added Rebecca Bassnett to the front office staff at Morris recently, Jessica Bazinet, second grade teacher at Morris, Alexa Bermudez, an art teacher at LMMHS, Brent Bett, our new assistant principal at LMMHS. Very big shoes to fill there with the departure of Brian Cogswell, but Brent's more than up to the task, and he's a great hire, so we're really happy to have him aboard. Kay Culbertson is a special education teacher who will be joining us at the secondary level too. Erin Malloy is a health and wellness teacher at LMMHS. Randy McLeod is our new technology director, and he recently began with us, and just hot off the presses, we also have a new IT technician, Sam Young. So a number of new additions, and I think some really strong folks. So I was really pleased with the quality of candidates that we were able to attract. I was also pleased that we didn't settle, and so we went through a couple of different machinations of proposed positions, and when we couldn't get the right person, rather than just hiring for the sake of hiring, we decided to go back to the drawing board and ensure that we were bringing in the very best quality to the district. So that was something I was really pleased to see, that we were willing to be flexible and adaptable to make sure we get the best people in front of our kids. So that was exciting.
Excuse me?
Sure.
There's 3 people on that list we didn't mention.
There's two I didn't mention.
Yes.
So, want to fill me in on who we're missing here?
Actually, four, because you skipped from Randy down to the technician and didn't do the ones in between or the very last person.
Maybe I'm looking at a different list.
Are you looking at a different list?
I very well may be.
Okay. Heather McNeese, Business and Technology at the Sullivan High School. Elizabeth O'Brien, a data manager at the Sullivan High School. Erica Tell, a middle school science teacher. And Joseph Jarama, who's our new bus driver.
Thank you for that. So, I don't know how that was missing from my list, but I appreciate your support as always. So thank you. And we did mention Elizabeth O'Brien joining us as a data manager, and so I've also submitted for the school committee's review a change in the data manager job description. So this position previously was known as the registrar, and the registrar worked closely with the guidance department to enroll new students at the secondary level. And so this new job will still do some of that, but in addition, we're looking at having the data manager take on state and federal reporting. So over the years, the amount of reporting that has to be done to the state and federal government has grown exponentially, and so having a person to help with that that's not someone in our technology department is just a huge help to the district overall. That they would also be able to create the data exports, create student schedules, do the enrollment that they've always done, and then maybe in the future even stretch to provide some data visualizations that we could then use on our website to share our success with our community, and you can have more real-time access to what goes on in the district. So we're really excited about this new position, and again, very lucky to be able to find a person that kind of had this very unique skill set, being able to do the data entry and database management piece, but then also some coding and scripting work that would have to be done to move information between data systems. So we're really fortunate that we had a number of people come out, and I think we're able to hire a really great data manager, so we're really excited about that. So that's, and I don't know if you need to vote on that, or if it's just,
No, I don't think so.
but we just
Is
want
it
to
a
make sure.
professional staff position?
Yeah.
According to the policy book, we are supposed to approve job descriptions for professional staff. GCA.
It's a unit C,
Yes.
so in that sense, does it actually define as professional staff
Yeah, that's why I
relative
asked the
to?
question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it doesn't. If it's not administrative staff, if it's under unit C negotiation, I don't think that we typically, because it's adding a position, is that your thinking? Mr.
Well, our
Munch?
policy is all professional staff positions in the school system are to be created by the school committee. And each time a new position is established, the committee approves the job description. But what professional staff position means in the policy,
Yeah.
I'm not clear.
And I would submit it's not immediately clear that it's a new position. So it was an existing position that we've sort of changed the job description of, right? So, and that's where I think it gets a little bit sticky in terms of, how we interpret what new position means. Because it was an existing position that we just kind of rebranded.
But on the other hand, if you feel that the data manager job description is the way you want it, or if we feel that there should be some additions, it probably would be a good idea to vote on it, so that it's,
Or we can table it for now and bring it back next time. 2 minutes.
yeah. Yeah, why don't we bring it back the next time just to actually vote on, and then we formally have it, in the books that we approved it.
Can I ask a question, Mr.
Sure,
Chairman?
you may.
Is there a reason why we couldn't entertain it as a motion now? I mean, sometimes I don't like throwing out motions just for nothing, but if we believe that it needs to be approved because it has been revised, I believe we had that big discussion about the breakup of different positions into, and we approved those by vote at a prior meeting. So rather than adding a new thing on the agenda, because I have a funny feeling our agenda is going to be full in the coming meetings, I'd be willing to either encourage Mr. Munch or move myself to approve this job description. I think adding the additional duties makes a lot of sense, and it is a replacement of one staff to another. It's still subject to the Unit C bargaining contract as far as pay structure, correct?
Yep. Well, the only reason I was thinking that we might hold was it was the first reading for us, but I have no problem.
Could we also just refresh on the change that we made? We had a director of technology, right, which we decided to, we were eliminating the director level position, and then what did we settle on? Data manager, and was another position too?
There was the technology, let's just to know whatever the title was. There was the data manager, and there was the position of technology was going to be curriculum and technology, but they were unsuccessful finding
Okay.
a candidate who they felt could do both. So we went back to having, a technology director.
But when it comes to full-time equivalents, it's 3 for 3 because we had a data director, technology director, an assistant director, and then we had the data person who was a person who retired. So I think we still have the same
It's the same.
number of positions. We were just reallocating what they were doing, and I think the idea with the data manager was to make a more intensive, like really get that person as specialized, which seems to be what this does, and then take those jobs away from what Mike, because I'm still on Hawaii Times last name, I'm forgetting for this moment, Mike was doing, right? I think so.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel that this is, a really inclusive job description that covers the bases, I have no problem voting tonight. But I
Right,
just,
nor do I. I just want to
Yeah,
make sure
yeah.
you've got in it what you want before we approve it.
so if you want to make a motion, Ron?
Yeah, I move to approve the revised job description for the existing position of data manager as presented by Dr. Goswell.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and then the final bullet point for my report is we just need, as just a matter of record keeping for the district, to appoint a records access officer. So should a record request be made, we have to have a clearly defined designee of who that is. And so we've spoken with the folks at the town clerk's office, and we believe that having Kerry Sullivan serve that role would make the most sense. She kind of gets the requests already and then sends them up to us, and we fill in our parts and send them back. So it's kind of already the structure, but we want to make sure we formalize that so that we're crossing all of our T's and dotting all our I's, and making sure that we're following what we're required to submit to the state. So it's just a matter of just a little bit of cleanup work, but we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to appoint that records access officer. Again, I don't know if that's something that we need a vote for, but if we need to have a motion, we can certainly request that we take that under advisement that we appoint Kerry as the records access officer.
What is that position?
So,
Is it just a designation?
yes, so we have to, again, publish on our website in easy to find places who our records officer would be. Should someone want to make a records request, they know who to direct that to, rather than calling and trying to, go through multiple channels.
So if someone wants a transcript, do they go to that?
So if they want a transcript, no, that'll come through the guidance department, but these are more of employee records or those types of records that we get requests for from time to time. Usually it's from the press, but anyone from the public can make an information right to know request, and so that's where those will go. But anything that, then it comes to us to determine whether and what can be released, making sure that we're protecting students' rights. And then also, if it has to go to a different channel, sending it to them. So again, someone that doesn't have a reason to ask for a student's transcript would not be allowed to ask for a student's transcript, other than the parent of that
And
child.
is there training or something involved with that?
So right now, there's no specific training that's involved with it. because she already does fill this role for the town as well, because they're subject to the same need to have a designee for when records requests are made to the township.
Is there like a written SOP, because she's going outside of her regular office from the town, vis-a-vis in terms of the school, so that in terms of accountability and confidentiality, you know, we make sure that it flows to the proper person to sign off, and then flows back?
I could not be more pleased you asked that question, because I would say that one of my initial observations is that Lenox is very light on what I would call small p policy, particularly SOPs. And so that is one of my personal goals, professional goals here, is to help to really work on establishing those. And so that is something that we've had some discussion around, making sure that we do create a flow chart that clearly delineates how the process works from the initial request to the fulfillment of that request, and what channels it has to flow through. So if this is something that we want to wait until you have a chance to see that, we can certainly do that. But this is already our process as it is, because we still need to respond to these records requests as they come in. But we do need to have, I think, a better mechanism to be able to do this in a way that is sustainable and efficient and coordinated.
For the public, can we clarify what SOP is?
Standard operating procedure.
Okay, sorry, again, like, seems simple, but,
Sorry.
because I did have a concern around that as well, in the sense that when it comes to sometimes records for FOIA, for Freedom of Information Act, has to go through very many layers. So if Ms. Sullivan's position was only to just certify this is from the town of Lenox, that'd be one thing. If it really is coming through procedurally, because we have a number of, we also have HIPAA, you know, we have FERPA, we have employment records, so we have many layers of confidentiality, and sometimes records are discoverable but redacted. I wonder why it wouldn't be you or our, you know, or legal counsel or someone within a records request, because the FOIA's, you know, there's also other legal ramifications if you don't provide certain documents, so it does leave me a little bit like, you know, town records are very different than school records, because we act in a capacity of medical, as well as educational, as well as family confidentiality, sometimes criminal, like 51As, we could go through the alphabet soup, right, of all the different legal requirements that we fall under. It does make me concerned that we would want to have somebody who specifically understands education. Ms. Sullivan deals with a myriad of requests and does a great job, but I wonder if it shouldn't be someone within our.
So I mean, that's an excellent point. What I would add on, though, is that, again, many other town departments are still subject to many of those same laws, right? And so she serves as the point person. Then she would then turn that over to us and say, hey, I got a records request, what do you guys want to do about this, what can I disclose? So it does ultimately come to us to make those decisions and to make sure that we're making what we need to protect in terms of HIPAA and FERPA, and making sure that we're not oversharing information that shouldn't be shared. And again, a student's record request can only go to the parent or a lawyer as part of discovery. But so that would be one that would be very tightly guarded. And that what generally this really is saying is that, you know, if the press or if a parent or a taxpayer wants to say, I want to see all the certifications for all the teachers, she would be the person that they would go to and to make that request. Then, you know, she would route it to us to get whatever, because she doesn't have ready access to all these records. She's still going to have to come through us to get those records. And so we would be actually pulling those things and scanning them and that type of thing, preparing them for her. But it just kind of designates her as the point person for someone outside of the system to know who to go through to initiate the process.
And again, sorry for the public, FERPA is federal education rights to privacy. HIPAA is your health rights to privacy, so I don't mean to be using the edu-speak, but those are some of the things we talk about, rights to privacy of children, families, and employees of the town. Sorry for doing that.
It's all good. So I think maybe we should have a vote to formally appoint Kerry Sullivan, our town clerk, as the records access officer for the school department. She's obviously the initial point person. It's going to come up to Amy or you or Melissa or somebody ultimately, but I think
Could we just vote to appoint the town clerk rather than naming an individual? Because then it would carry over if, Kerry.
Should it be specific, or should it be a name specific?
So I understand, I think the pragmatism in just saying town clerk. However, I do think that it would be more clear if we actually name a person, even if we have to do it every year. And I know it might seem trite and silly, but I think that, again, there's a whole checklist that DESE puts out, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, for superintendents of all kinds of reports and files that have to be done. And so I'm going through for last year and this year, making sure that we've done all of those pieces. And one of them is this appointment. So they probably would like to see an actual person's name tied to that, so they know who that particular designee is.
Sure, okay. So, all right, well, I'll move that we appoint Kerry Sullivan, the Lenox Town Clerk, as Records Access Officer.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion?
I'm just not clear what we're doing. We're appointing a town employee to a position of the school? Or we're just?
From what I understand, it sounds
We're
like
naming-
We're signing somebody up for something who doesn't work for us.
We're naming the person who will be the first point of contact for somebody in the public for rec access. And we asked Chris Ketchum about this, and, he said, the town, has appointed her, that we should appoint someone. We asked about whether she could be it, and she agreed, and he agreed that would be okay. But I think I know it's not a school department employee. There's no money changes hands on these
I mean,
requests.
She also has to attest. So I think that there's an official attestation that these are the official records. So assume for a minute there's a legal proceeding or something, there's also that part of it. So I feel like perhaps the tradition of having someone in her position is that, she certifies our elections, she has to certify our documents that we put in after we get elected. So I feel like that's the certification of the records is the part that she does, and the rest of it the school department does, if I'm hearing it correctly.
I'm good now.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
All right, that concludes the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's.
Dr. Gosselin. So now we have a couple policies for a read and a vote. And the first one is school admissions, and I believe that we're doing this because this was recommended in the audit. I know David had some concerns that he felt there was a paragraph missing, or that the school admissions that didn't quite line up. So-
My concern, when I happened to just look up 603 CMR 26, I believe ours does not match what I found online. This is not a deal breaker, but
The citation doesn't match with the content.
there's a third paragraph, I believe, and it's slightly different. I believe the first two paragraphs are the same, and there's an additional third paragraph. So I just felt if we're gonna, it should be accurate.
Okay, I think that maybe then we should see if, did this come from Kim?
Yes.
Yeah, see if there was a particular reason why that was not included here, and bring this back.
Is this like a legacy at all? It doesn't matter.
There were some changes, I believe, made to this.
The big piece was that we had an existing admission policy, right? A school committee policy, but it was missing specific language pursuant to homeless students and military family status. And so, and this is true for just about everyone in the Commonwealth, especially the military piece. So we were pushed by the folks who did our audit to make sure that we have that policy that specifically speaks to the military piece. So that had just been sort of plugged into this, and so if that other, it'd be interesting to go back and see if that other paragraph that you're speaking in was in the original document or not. So But we can circle back and make sure that it's there, we'll check with Kim tomorrow.
Okay, so we'll bring that back on August 30th for, and see if we can do maybe that additional paragraph. Okay, moving on then, the wellness policy is fairly lengthy. It's policy JLG, and we're required annually to approve this. We may not have always done this annually, but we're required to. And David also pointed out that there were references to Exhibit A. Well, Exhibit A, if you actually go into our policy book, Exhibit A is the I don't know who's nutrition department. I'm just trying to bring it up on my screen here of all these screenshots I've made of things. And I can't open it because it's in the trash. But anyway, if you looked in our policy book, you'd see that it's the guideline, nutrition guidelines, national nutrition guidelines. And so it's referenced several times in this policy.
Bob, is this open for some just additional questions?
Yeah.
So, just to understand some, a lot of the policy in terms of meal times and scheduling, at least in the nutritional part of it, talks about things like, students, under meal times and scheduling, they talk about students will have at least 20 minutes to eat lunch after sitting down. I just didn't know, I'm not as intimately knowledgeable with our schedule to know if are we building in kind of travel time, food, service time in that 20 minutes, so that the block of time within our schedules for the kids has time in the front and time in the back to get there, sit down, to go through a food line, to sit down and actually eat for 20 minutes, and then get up and then get back to class.
As a former elementary principal,
So I don't know.
I would say probably not.
Okay.
Because we scheduled 20-minute lunches.
And 20 minutes lunch is 20 minutes lunch.
Yeah, it may have been 20 minutes in the cafeteria, but there was time in line,
Or just, or it's just the policy says eat 20 minutes to eat after sitting down, so.
Right, that would be,
Normal.
A question I had was, and I don't know what the page numbers are, I guess in what was sent to us is page 12, under portion sizes. It says lunch 2012, 2013, and I don't know if that date should be changed. I think this policy, the whole wellness policy is created in 2013, because I can remember you were in the committee then, and I remember this going through at that time. I just didn't know if those dates needed to stay here or be updated. Because they show up there under K to 5, and then they show up in the next page under 6 to 8, and they show up under K to 12, lunch 2012-13. The actual daily ounces and cups and whatever, they may have stayed the same. That might not have changed, but
Nothing has changed.
yeah. So I'm wondering if we even need the date in there. At the end, we can say policy was reapproved on August 9th, 2021 or whatever, but I'm not sure why we would need to have the date in the body of it.
Yeah, you generally don't see that.
Yeah.
And so what typically happens is more what you just alluded to, the idea that you have a pretty standard policy, unless, you're always at liberty to change it every year, which is why they want to look at it, but then you just, take a look at it, if everything still looks great, then you just do that, revised, 2021, indicating that you have gone through the process. So I would recommend taking the dates out so that just makes the process more efficient moving forward.
can I make another comment about those tables?
Yep, yep.
So when I read them, everything seems to equate daily, everything is a multiple of 5 to get from daily to weekly, and I just didn't understand on all of them, say for meats and grains, everything is, for grades K through 5, it doesn't follow the pattern of the other. So I just wondered if anyone knew why.
I have no idea.
And everything
I
else
wasn't
seems
here when
to-
that was written, so I would
Yeah.
imagine, that it's likely, entirely likely, that those were recommendations from the US GA at the time. So again,
It's just weird though.
maybe we'll give why they asked people to look at it as a
Yeah, because you can't, your recommended amount of 1 ounce, everything else matches. I just wonder if it's a typo in these tables. It could very well be that, there should be, or no, I don't know.
It's interesting, Dave, I hadn't looked at the numbers until you just mentioned it. But if you look under grade 6 to 8, for example, it's 1 ounce daily, but it's 9 to 10 ounces weekly.
Right.
Yeah, so there's some discrepancy there. I can see under vegetables, however, the 3/4 cup and the 3 3/4, they then break it down into what types of vegetables. So I can see leaving both columns there.
Yeah. And once you get to 9 to 12, everything seems to get pretty close.
Right, that's what I looked at first, and then when I scrolled back, I thought, I wonder how daily's 1 ounce, but weekly's 8 to 10 ounces. You're gonna have to cram a few really heavy-duty days in there.
And a question for me, and maybe I just misheard it. So this is just a renewal of the policy, or did our wellness committee actually do any deep dives into our nutrition program?
No, it's a,
So again, not trying to make work for later, but my thought is that we table this and actually work with our wellness committee to do a deep dive. I remember the conversation very vividly with Dr. Costa, because it was under the new revision of the nutrition guidelines that was happening nationally, but we didn't really have a conversation that I felt was important under the issues of what parents were looking for, which is how are we joining in other Berkshire-based communities and doing more homegrown foods and finding ways to be less dependent on some of the state and federal food supplements, which often come in processed forms, and how are we really doing a deep dive and how are we feeding our kids in a way that fits with Berkshire's values and resources, and how many people during COVID found themselves, like I did, joining a farm share or trying to buy locally because transportation of foods and goods was becoming inaccessible and highly costly. So on the one hand, we have, the federal government says we have to give our kids healthy nutritional food, and then I think we have a deep dive look into what is healthy nutritional food in our opinion in Berkshire counties of Massachusetts, and looking at how do we feed our kids, and also finding locally and nationally an increase in food sensitivities and nutrition, kids who really struggle with food sensitivities, whether it's wheat and grain sensitivities and other additives. I know there are kids who have even allergies to certain additives. So I feel like maybe we table this and not just, give an endorsement. It was passed, it's still a policy of our school committee, and we find time amongst our other things, but we have subcommittees to do a little bit of a deeper dive. We've had some changeover in staff, I believe, in our nutrition department when Ms. Sorrentino retired. So maybe we put it on our health and wellness committees to take a deep dive into what are we doing? I mean, I really want to see us engage with I know some schools are doing close work with Berkshire Grown and other local farms and CSAs to get farm fresh food, and to also get ourselves less reliant on the highly subsidized but also processed food that often comes from government allocations, which I think a lot of the kids don't love.
And would it be appropriate when we do have that conversation to revisit the 20-minute period that we're giving children time to eat lunch? As a parent of 3 young children, getting kids to eat within 20 minutes is almost impossible. My oldest comes home with a half-full lunchbox almost all the time, and I'm like, what's up with this? And I didn't have time to eat. Kids talk, kids aren't going to sit down immediately and start eating, so I think we should talk about that as well.
yeah, this is just a former elementary principal speaking. we found out that if you had lunch first before you had recess, kids saw their friends finishing and just didn't finish lunch. If you had recess first, kids tended to do better. And, I have no clue what the actual schedule is now. We tried to make it so that they had recess first, but I don't.
Yeah, just curious to look into that and see if
Yeah.
that's still happening.
Yeah. But I think it
While we're at
also
it.
would be good for Lori Goodfellow to look at these numbers
Yeah.
and see why the discrepancy, because it may just be on K-5 that it should be 2 ounces daily, and so it might be very simple that you got typed in.
We had a number of significant changes, as I recall, around not just what we were offering and the federal regulations in the government, but also how we were staffing that, how we were funding that. We had been working off some models that weren't really providing us clarity as to how things were being paid for. I think we had to clear a deficit, et cetera. So I think there's a lot to look at. The other thing I'd like to see us look at from a health and wellness perspective is in the middle of high school, many students go immediately to sports. And they had an 11 o'clock lunch, and then they have a 2:30 practice or a 3:45 practice, and not an opportunity to have healthy lunch. And again, I think that's an equity issue. Families who are dropping off a second lunch to their kids or providing them, so perhaps as part of health and wellness, we can look at the entire, not changing, but looking at the food delivery system, what's available, when it's available, and in the high school, middle school, our kids having access to some type of, reasonable, healthy something before they head to practice. Sometimes they get here at 7 in the morning and they don't go home until 5 p.m. And some it's for SAT prep, or it's for sports, or other after-school activities. So that's just a thought too.
Okay, so it sounds like we're not feeling like we should be approving this tonight.
Yeah, I got one more.
Yeah, that's why we're here, Dave.
It's under the physical activity opportunities section. I just want some clarification, because kind of when I read about physical opportunities, it talks about, extracurricular programs, clubs, intramural sports. And then when I jump down to physical activity and punishment, it talks about, physical activity. You'll not use physical activity or withhold opportunities for physical activity as punishment. I don't know if that squares with our sports programs.
Sir, can I just go back before we move on from wellness, if that's okay? So I think.
Identify who you.
Mindy Moore, 80 Pine Knoll, and Managing Director at Canyon Ranch. I think Mindy Moore, 80 Pine Knoll, Managing Director at Canyon Ranch. I recall, I don't know the exact time frame, but it was probably about 3.5 years ago, there was actually a committee that was formed for just this. And we met about 3 or 4 times, I think, with the former superintendent, and we talked about snacks, we talked about nutrition. There were several people, obviously, from the school that were involved, and several parents as well. So I think we may want to dust that off and reconsider it. And not only was I involved in it, but there were other organizations throughout Lenox that were also involved as a way to bring wellness to the students at both levels. So.
Thank you, Mindy.
And can I also say we're grateful that we have so many organizations in our community that offer role models, their time and volunteerism, whether it's Canyon Ranch or our friends at Kripalu that talk about mindfulness and wellness. And I think we are extremely fortunate to have so many resources in our community that think in the terms of the whole child and the whole being. And I think when we all model that, we had yoga for teachers at one point, again, where we can all be together. And I think we just are so fortunate that those people are within our community, and we can take advantage of that community partnership to take good care of ourselves.
Did you want to continue?
Yeah, it's just, I am not clear exactly on what, is considered punishment. And are we excluding participation, or should participation in sports teams not be, let me start over. Should non-participation in sports teams be used as a form of punishment, whether it be academic or whatever. Because the way this is written, it seems as though, since it's included under the physical activity opportunities section, and physical activities will not be withheld as punishment, I just wanted, I think we need to clarify or exclude, or have a caveat in here that says we will be excluding team sports from this, punishment waiver.
Yeah, I think, David, that the two sections are actually separate, or intended to be separate. The physical activity opportunities before and after school speaks to one issue, and the physical activity and punishment speaks to a teacher at the elementary school not letting he go to recess because he hasn't finished his work.
But is the elementary school playing, intramural
Yeah,
sports?
but see, that's a different section here. That's withholding opportunities for physical activity, e.g. recess, physical education. You can't go to your PE class because you haven't done something academic or whatever.
But we mentioned intramural programs.
But I think the intramural stuff comes in the earlier section.
Yeah, it's being defined as a physical activity. It's under this defines intramural programs as a physical activity. And the other section is, the e.g. recess, physical education are just examples. But we can't define extramural programs as physical activities and then say, hey, well, except when we want to punish someone, then it isn't a physical activity.
So you're saying on the extracurricular activities, for example, that a teacher said, I'm sorry, you can't go to that today because I need you to stay after school and work on your math homework.
Or you didn't make the grade.
Or something.
Because we have participation in physical, in soccer or whatever sports. I think right now there's a policy that says if you don't, if your academic performance does not meet a certain standard, then you cannot participate in that in that program, whether it be for part of the semester, whether it be for a game, and I just see a conflict here that this is saying, well, hey, we can't, that's punishment, and this is saying, well, hey, we can't use intramural programs as as punishment, and regrettably, someone's not making a grade. Unfortunately, it's a whole other issue, but it is being viewed kind of as as punishment.
And I would concur in a way with David that I think that that's another part of the policy that has to be really looked at. And again, it goes from this idea too about students who are struggling with performance in school. Sometimes what we're doing is we're trying to identify a learning need or a teaching situation or support that a student needs. We're not, looking to take a child and end their career in soccer at 13 because they haven't figured out how to do math. I think that, unfortunately, I think that does happen. We do have MIAA as our subscribe. We subscribe to MIAA, Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, alphabet soup, and I think that it is a huge way in which there's problems that relate to bias, and I think also when it comes to student discipline by coaches or whatever for issues that relate to safety or inappropriate behavior that should be dealt with, that's fine. But if a student is struggling in one place, how is that carried over to the other? And I think, again, though, with Dr. Gosselin being new to us and really focusing a lot on a lot of these types of issues as we're reviewing what we're doing, maybe that goes under our Health and Wellness Committee. Do we have a standing committee right now? I certainly know that it's under our culture and under a lot of our strategic plans. So perhaps we bullet point the things we want to look at. I think they all require a deep dive. I also think that when you have children who struggle sometimes behaviorally because they're antsy and they need to move and then we keep them in on recess, I've certainly experienced how that feels like, but we also don't want to micromanage, but we want to be able to set a tone that sometimes physical activity is exactly what a child needs. But that sounds like that's a school culture thing that Dr. Gosselin's going to be working on and working with, well, what are our behavior management resources? How are we managing behavior for students, you know, so I think it's funny because we think it's a simple pro forma check the box wellness policy, but underpinning a lot of it is really the whole wellness of our community, not just our children, but our teachers sometimes who also need a break in movement and physical activity as well. So sounds like we have some bullet points that we want to look at. And send
Or
it
we
back,
just have
right?
to add a line that says we're excluding, you know, sports from this section.
So the MIAA might create a situation because they have their own rules. So we might not be able to just cherry pick that when it comes to qualifications for athletics if we have an issue with students qualifying. Although I think our policy might be different than MIAA's. I think ours is more strict.
But I do think that this physical activity and punishment section was trying to address something a little bit different. But-
I think we're trying to address
Yeah,
something different, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm
but
just
it-
saying,
but
I'm
it
not
may
sure
be
totally
Totally clear.
correct, yeah. I'm just trying to tighten it up.
Can we recognize Mary Cherry if she
Yeah,
still
Mary.
wants to speak?
Yeah. I was going to.
Ryan kind of touched on what I was going to say. Some of these rules are MIAA, and I just think when you go about talking about these things, to really distinguish between the word punishment and the word consequence. And MIAA student athletes, the student is always first. And so the discussion would have to be, if you're not really a student, for instance, if you're absent or not making the grade, not in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 subjects, student athlete is, and I'm not the athletic director, so I think the athletic director probably should be part of that conversation as well.
Absolutely.
Anything further discussion on this?
Kristen Moriarty, 279 Housatonic Street. I just want to also reiterate what Megan was saying and what Mindy was saying as well about including parents. I have a daughter who has a 504 accommodation plan, so she's allowed to eat for as much time as she needs, but she has a specific plan that allows her to do that, and most of the students in the schools don't. And so I just want to reiterate that I don't think 20 minutes is enough time for lunch for most students out there, or adults. It's not healthy for us to scarf down our food, and it's also not appropriate to tell students that they're not allowed to talk in one of the only social times during the day in order for them to meet the needs. And I understand that time frames and logistics are a part of that as well, but the physical part of the student is equally important, and when they don't have the proper nutrition and the proper blood sugar levels, they can't concentrate on their studies and they're not achieving their best.
I may not be familiar with this policy. What's the reference to not being allowed to talk? Is that they can't talk during lunch?
I've just heard my students say that before.
Is that a policy?
Can I just say something? Ellen Loftus, 219 Main Street. I have high schoolers who complain that they don't have enough. I also have a daughter who has a 504, and she has a bilateral above knee amputee, so it takes her a little while to get her lunch, and when she only has 20 minutes and she's trying to scarf down. So what they do is they pick lunch that they can just grab. So it's not healthy, and they're hungry and they come home starved. 20 minutes is not enough, and no, they're not allowed to talk during lunch. At least the little kids. I have older kids now, but they're not, and that's their social time. So I just wanted to.
I have little kids, I can
Yeah.
confirm that. That's what I hear from my children as
They're
well.
not allowed to talk in the cafeteria during lunch?
Because they have 20 minutes to eat, so if you're
But they
talking,
feel like
you
they
know.
don't have enough time to talk, or there's a rule that they may not talk?
No, they can't.
Can we ask Principal Kelly to comment?
So I can
Yeah,
just
I
speak to my 1 year at Morris, sorry. And when we came back under the pandemic, we had to do things differently, which required us to have lunch within the classroom, having half the students eat at a time. Last year, lunch was not 20 minutes, it was 15 because we were scheduling, spacing, there was all the guidance that came out from DESE, which part of that, I can only speak to my 1 year. I'm not a fan of not having kids talk at lunch, so some of this stuff is shocking to me. But for last year, my experience only, the guidelines from DESE was when masks were off, just really to eat your lunch and then put your mask back on. And that's what we were following. I can only, again, go by last year's experience. But trust me, I'm listening to all the parents and I'm taking into everything that you're saying into consideration.
Yeah, and just, Lauren, what you've asked here, I mean, I was a principal for a long time, and I used to sit, talk to kids at lunch. So, I mean, you know, kids not talking at lunch, it seems very foreign to me. I can certainly see people doing it because they're seeing kids talking and never eating, and their lunch is sitting there, but I don't believe there's a hard and fast rule. I don't think there ever was a hard and fast rule, so it's, yeah, it's a little troubling.
I worked in the building spot, in the Morris building 5 years ago, and there was plenty of talking going on. Something has changed in that 5 years. It was so loud that we had to turn the lights off on occasion to get the children to
Right.
quiet down a little bit. 5 years ago, again, so I don't know what's changed since then, but there was no rule at that time that they couldn't talk, and there was no, they were encouraged to eat before they talked, but there was plenty of talking going on.
And I think if we didn't have that hard and fast 20-minute rule, we wouldn't have to be having this conversation. You know, like when I see my friends at lunch, part of the enjoyment is you're conversating with those people and enjoying lunch. You know, this is a school setting, but I feel very, very strongly that we need to kind of look at our lunch practices there.
I think that's something that really resonates with me as a parent and as a former principal also of an elementary school. You know, to me, I do think kids should be talking during lunch and having opportunities to socialize. That is part of their only unstructured time these days, right? So it is important. You know, and allowing children to do basic things like use the bathroom. But I have seen, you know, kids be denied some of these things. So I think it's a culture that does exist in some elementary schools. I know Brenda well enough in just a short period of time working with her that that's not, you know, her view on schools. And so if we need to, you know, circle back and do some retraining of staff, you know, we can certainly do that as well. But I think, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time for Brenda, especially, you know, her first year was during COVID, to work on helping to improve culture at the building. It's a great school as it is, but there's always room for growth. And if that's something that, you know, we think, and I think any parent would want their kids to be able to have approximating a normal lunch, that we should be striving toward that. And if we want to talk about expanding lunch, you know, we can start talking, I think, at another time around scheduling and time has come from somewhere. So, you know, where we can creatively find some time of the day, or maybe we have to vote to say we're going to put some more time on because we want kids to have it. And I've seen districts do that, and there's nothing wrong with saying that we're going to add, you know, 30 minutes in so kids can have a longer recess. That's happened all over the country. You know, and some parents scratch their heads and say, well, that's crazy. You have to have time they can play. For some kids, that really literally is something that has to happen because so much of their life outside of school is highly scheduled and orchestrated as well. So, but I think it's great, I think, dialogue, and I think that, to me, what I'm excited about is the fact that by being forced to revisit this policy and actually going through the motion, we're gonna have a better policy, right? And so this is why I think it's important to start doing these things in a more cyclical, ongoing fashion and having our SOPs, standard operating procedures, so that we have a more intentional way of doing these things. So, you know, I'm excited about seeing where this goes, and it's gonna be a balancing act because we have to balance the, what we have to do to meet the requirements to be a federal school lunch program participant, and then also be a member of the MIAA and making sure that we're thinking about academic eligibility and what that does. You know, because I've seen, unfortunately, schools be disqualified for playoffs because they accidentally played a player who was ineligible academically, right? So there's a lot to think around, and again, making sure that we're hearing from voices and making sure that our special education students, our students of 504s, are also included, their parents in these conversations too, so that we know that you know, you can't make rules that marginalize kids or penalize them for these disabilities either. So it's definitely an equity issue, but it's an overall wellness and academics. So there's a lot of, I think, overlapping issues that we have to address, but you know, I think it's going to be wonderful to get a group of stakeholders back together to take a look at this.
Okay, so it looks like both of those, I think the wellness policy will be some time before we see that again, because the wellness committee will need to get reformed and tackle this whole issue.
And ultimately, we have a whole year to work on it, right? It's really done today.
Right.
And Bob, can I just interject too? I believe we still have our PTO in the Morris School as well as the school council. At the high school, we have school council, and then we also have what's the what's the alphabet soup for the committee that deals with, that helps to support students with special needs? There's an acronym. It's another one, right? Not the national CPAC, but our own students with supports, where we address, we get community input and parent input around meeting needs of special needs students. And so I think we have some existing bodies that will probably be really happy to talk less about COVID if possible, and talk more about the wellness factors for students of all abilities, and think in terms of our communities. The PTO, obviously, for Morris, has a lot of really people who are working hard, and maybe there'll be a way to go to those committees to get some good input. We've been kind of talking about one subject for a long time, so I think people want to really talk about it. And we had a garden at Morris School at one point. I'm not sure if that's still alive or can be revived, because that was also an integral part of the students understanding nutrition and growing their own food.
The garden is now 3 outdoor learning spaces.
Right. So I'm saying, again, there's something that we worked on that maybe could be revived.
They're also beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah,
they
the
are.
learning spaces are beautiful. Yeah, there was where the garden was. Okay, so we'll be coming back to these, obviously wellness policy sometime down the road, the admissions policy at our next meeting. So moving on to new business, the School Building Needs Committee. We've had discussions for some years now about the need to address some of the issues at LMMHS regarding particularly the science rooms initially, because they were the 1966 science rooms and don't meet the current specifications. And the Department of Ed has put out, or Mass School Building Authority has put out some real guidelines on what the science classroom should look like. But in the last 3 to 5 years, we've had some issues that we've dealt with the walls in the high school wing, the asbestos in the high school wing. So we've, a lot has happened that we weren't like thrilled about in either case. But that notwithstanding, I think the strategic plan has a section on facilities, and I think it's time to actually reconstitute the School Building Needs Committee and then begin to talk about these issues, because it's not a short process. It's not something that just happens overnight. If we had our act together during COVID and we had been able to meet frequently, we could have submitted something by June 15th or June 25th or whatever, with some indication, but that didn't happen, and yet we've been talking about science rooms for quite some time now. Tim Lee was working on it pretty extensively back in 2018 on the science room aspect of it. We did some remodeling of some rooms to get a technology space down where the old woodshop storage room used to be. Some things happened, but there are still some gaping needs, particularly at the high school. And a building needs committee that looked not just at the high school, they looked at Morris also. We know we have roof issues, but we can't. MSBA changed the rules on how long you have to go on a roof, so now you got to go 30 years instead of 20. So we applied at 20, and we're told, well, the rules have changed. Now we'll hold off another 10 years, and you can reapply. And so we're still, Morris was opened in 1996, so we still have 5 years before we hit the 30-year mark there. And the high school was opened in 98, so we still have a few years there. Those are extensive jobs, but again, would all fall under the guidance that I think it's all stuff for a formal school building committee to talk about. So in anticipation of this meeting, I knew that there are requirements by law as to who has to, members that would be part of that committee, and some of which I didn't fully understand. And I emailed MSBA. I spoke to somebody, and they said, "Oh, we'll run this by the attorneys, and they'll get back to you." Well, that was 2 weeks ago, and I haven't heard from anybody yet. So probably tomorrow I will. But that notwithstanding, I think tonight all I'm looking for is a vote of the committee to form a school building committee, and then we can populate it. There's a school building committee member who's MCPPO certified, so I'm guessing that's our superintendent of business affairs, Melissa Volkowski. You know, there's a place for a school committee member, minimum of one, it can be more than one. Superintendent of schools, local chief executive officer, administrator or manager. I think that that would be Chris Ketchen for either of those positions. Local official responsible for building maintenance, you know, that might also be Melissa Volkowski, or it might be a lead custodian. Representative of office authorized by law to construct school buildings. No clue what that means. Member knowledgeable in educational mission and function of facility, that we have plenty of people who could do that. Local budget official, a member of local finance committee, they're awake. Members of community with architecture, engineering, and/or construction experience, and then other. So I think the committee can be a reasonable size committee. That might not be easy to work with a large committee, but I think it could be 10 to 15 people. Right off the bat, you need about 10 just to fulfill the sheet here. But anyway, I'm looking tonight just for the authorization to begin the process of establishing a school building committee, so we can begin discussions this year of the pressing needs that we have.
Does this overlap at all with the permanent building committee of the town?
No, actually, because by law, I would certainly hope that we might have a member or two from that on this. But when the permanent building committee was established a few years ago, it was clear that, except for school building, because of the way the law reads about the very specific people who need to be on this. So it can't be the same group.
But it can be overlap?
Yeah, sure you could have overlap. I would think, for example, somebody with engineering and construction experience, you might want, Jim Harwood, you might want Neil Maximilian. Obviously these people have multiple roles in town, but, again, we'd need to ask and see. There may be other people out there who could fill these roles that I don't even know about. But I think it's time to move on down and actually establish the committee. I think we have to actually populate the committee, send this letter off to MSBA to get approval, that they agree, before we can really start any work, and so it's a process. So I would entertain a motion to establish a school building committee.
Bob, I move that we establish a school building committee.
I second that fine motion.
Is there further discussion? Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
It's done.
Thank you for
Okay, so moving on, COVID, fall 2021 COVID memo, and so in addition to the memo that Lauren included in the packet, we also had an extensive thing that Mark sent out via the attorney for the Mass Association of School Superintendents today. So, Lauren, I'll let you get started in the conversation about.
Yeah, actually, I thought the memo that Dr. Goslin summarized the situation incredibly well. There have obviously been a wide variety of guidances flying around, but everyone seems to have decided that school committees are all going to have to figure it out themselves. And so I guess that's us. Yeah, we have the little placards and everything. And so, what I outlined in my memo was a suggested way of approaching it, which is just that I think it's really important not to start from where we ended the last year as the default, but to recognize that having normal school for the kids is the default and the goal, and ask what, if anything, we need to layer atop that. As I put in the memo, my reading of the data is that at this point, the the risk both to kids and vaccinated adults looks roughly similar to the sorts of risks we always tolerated before COVID, in which case I would hope we could return to that kind of footing. But obviously people have very strong views, so I would be interested to hear those.
If I can, I think that so the Mass Association of School Committees memo, Mass Association of School Committees for people, again, of the public, is an organization that helps to guide those of us who are typically lay people. I mean, many of us are not in the profession of health, or, well, some are, or wellness, or other expertise, and so they help guide us. And of course, every single day we're getting information from DESE, Department of Education, of elementary and secondary education, as well as the CDC and the state of Massachusetts. And so one of the things I would say, in agreeing with you, Oren, that the hard part is whenever we engage in the conversation of normal, it feels almost like it's a challenge, like we say in the memes, hold my beer, because we say we're going to get back to normal, and then we have a rash of infections in Provincetown from people resuming normal activity, and most of those people were vaccinated. So unfortunately, I think this memo from the MASC lawyers are looking at data this week. Mr. Cass's memo to us as fellow school committee members, which is part of the public record, as well as the memos from DESE from a week ago, have changed significantly. And I think that we have another meeting on August 30th. I don't know if we're going to have an interim meeting. I think it might be that it's going to require that we do that or put it in our retreat. But the issue of masks and how we're going to handle those have a couple of different issues. One is it's a collective bargaining issue, and we have to be clear that we're respecting the adult people in our building that are with our children, because their risks are different than the children, and the protocols are different, as well as the fact that we're now seeing children who are vaccinated getting sicker than they were before. So I was trying to search today after reading that to try to say, God forbid, what are the morbidities of children? And although I see those are very, very low, I think the prior information about the COVID-19 that we knew before the Delta variant was that children were not getting very sick. And now I'm hearing anecdotal information, but I went to search it and say, well, where's the data that tells us how sick kids get? And I don't know, I think unless you're not a parent, but even if you are not a parent, you have people in your life that have been sick, there's nothing more miserable than a sick child, and many children have asthma and other complicating factors. So we have children in our buildings who have autoimmune issues as well as illnesses like asthma. So I'm not saying that to ring the bell, I'm saying that to how do we get the information that we need. If we say everybody's masked, that impacts the culture of the school and how kids interact. If we're not in school, I don't personally think that I'm seeing anything that says that that's our conversation. I think the kids are going to be in school, how they're in school with one another, and how we figure out what's safe for them and for the adults in our building. It feels like even as of today, and I'm looking to Dr. Goslin, that we don't actually have up-to-date information, because from July 1st to now, it's rapidly changing. If you look at the numbers, the variation is going up. And our children are still not eligible for vaccinations, and so what does that mean? And I don't even know if I'd be prepared to vote on something tonight for something that's going to happen. Our first day of school is August 30th, if I'm looking back at my calendar.
September 2nd.
September 2nd, with adults in the building on August 30th, right? So
I want to speak to this, if I can, from a professional standpoint and also as a parent. Professionally, I am certified in infection prevention through the CDC, so this is kind of what I do. I keep hearing over and over again, we have to eradicate this virus. This virus is not going anywhere. It will continue to mutate just like influenza does. We are going to have to learn how to adjust our lives and live with it. Obviously, hopefully that means that a vaccine for our children becomes available sooner than later. As a parent, I have 3 children. They were all born prematurely. One has asthma. So if there's anyone that's concerned with the health of their children, it's me. I've been through episodes of the flu when they were young, RSV, all sorts of viral things that are here to stay, right? And the ugly truth is that COVID-19 is now one of those viruses that is also here to stay. I feel very strongly that our children need to be back in school. I wish there was, like when I said, a magic answer we could all just kind of vote on right now and say, let's do it. I will say Mass is on a 6-day decline in case count, so things are trending the right way.
I also have a lot of thoughts on this issue and think about this issue.
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little, Christine?
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, and I think I'm going to offer, with all due respect, a bit of a different perspective from my colleague here. I think it's actually our responsibility as a school committee. I mean, it appears that it's legally our responsibility, but just also our duty to take a position on this, and the earlier we do so prior to the start of the school year, I think the better. I actually personally would be prepared to vote tonight. I'm not sure that's the best idea, however, because I think it would make sense to gather more input from the community, from the Tri-Town Board of Health, from any other resources or stakeholders that have a voice in this. We would need to talk about the bargaining question and potentially initiate that if we're going down certain pathways. But nonetheless, I mean, yes, we agree we want to start this year in a place very different from what we went through last year, which was painful to, I'm certain, every single person. I also support being in school in person for all of our students and staff, as does Desi. I think there's good alignment around that. However, also agree that COVID is here to stay and that there has to be some tolerance in the system for that fact, which we haven't seen today. I don't think we're actually there yet. The Delta variant cases are rising very high. It's true they're rising in Massachusetts at a lower level that we can attribute to our better than average vaccination rates, which I'm very thankful for. Also thankful for the guidance, the sensible guidance of Desi. Not sure that that's the case in all states. But nonetheless, the risk to the unvaccinated is pretty high. Hospitalizations and deaths, albeit at a nationwide level, not speaking specifically about Massachusetts here, are rising incredibly fast on the order of 90 to 96% the past 14 days for the U.S. I looked today. Talk about Berkshire County, the CDC map of transmission has now turned to red, which is the highest level, so we are in high transmission, community transmission in Berkshire County. I personally, as you can see, have opted to start wearing a mask. I am vaccinated. It's a personal choice. All of these things are swirling. I think we have two major tools that I would invoke if we look at the COVID situation and what we can do in our school district. One is vaccination, which we should strongly support and continue to do so. It hasn't changed, will not change. The second and the easiest is masking, which I would strongly prefer over anything more restrictive, like any of the other measures that we entertained last year. I think actually we do need a masking policy. I think at a minimum, I would mirror what Desi is putting forward, which issues recommendations, perhaps strong recommendations, stop short of issuing any requirements. I actually personally would also think about requirements potentially for everyone in our schools. I think that's easy. Takes away the question of enforcement, takes away the question of wondering who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated. It's just becomes very simple. So for a temporary measure for this point in time, not to be enacted without limit, but something that we couldn't put an end date on for now. So again, maybe today is not the time to vote. I do think it's definitely the time to engage fully in this discussion, and we probably need to have meetings, especially if we're not voting tonight, before the 30th to talk about this further.
We do have a meeting set up for tomorrow afternoon at 2 with the I'm not sure what the title is, Health Task Force or something. It was the committee that Bill Cameron had established last year with several doctors and nurses and the person from Berkshire Regional Planning who was in charge of all the health.
So that committee is still meeting, because I was going to suggest that.
Yeah, it's meeting tomorrow.
It was a joint labor management committee.
Oh, it's not the joint labor management committee. This is the separate one that Dr. Cameron had to get advice from the medical community. So this is, but
It's not the Tri-Town Board of Health, no, there was.
Yeah. Jim Willis.
So the Tri-Town Board of Health.
Yeah.
Kit Ross, Laura Kit Ross,
No,
Noel Blagg,
Jim Lewis, Noel Blagg.
Diane Romeo.
Laura Kitros. Diane can't come.
She
because
can't come,
Then
but-
it becomes,
She's not, because of the Board of Health.
Meeting.
then it becomes a
that's right.
Open
forum
meeting.
of
Yeah.
Tri-Town Health,
Yeah.
so.
Oh, okay.
She only comes if Jim cannot come. But Laura Kitros, Molly Revest, I think Dan Doyle,
Was it Dr. O'Coin also? or-
yes,
Yeah,
Paul.
Dr.
yes,
O'Coin,
yeah.
Paul, yeah. So that's the group that's meeting tomorrow, and
Some of the members of the LEA have been invited as well. I've been invited, it's unclear if I'm able to attend, so I've asked Kelly Katie to attend in my absence.
Okay,
I know that joint labor and management committee that you were speaking about, Bob, I believe all three of those people, three of our faculty reps were invited to this as well. I know Hannah was invited, and I believe Jen Dries,
Yes,
and then,
and Kathleen,
Kathleen Shove,
and
and Melissa,
yes.
Melissa Paylor.
So I would like to see that JLMC reconstituted because.
We'd have to get an MOA on that.
Well,
I
or we
believe.
do it as a separate, school committee or something, just because, we were setting some metrics that we were looking at, we were setting some guidance for trying to anticipate changes, and anytime there was trending one way, that we would look at what the next stage would be. Independent of Tri-Town Health, we'd use their data, and
Right.
we'd be involved in the
Right.
conversation, but I thought it was a very productive group that got a lot done, so.
Ellen?
Yes, hi. I appreciate the forethought that you're putting into all this, and I'm not gonna argue whether they should mask or vaccines. What I wanna know is, are you gonna include parents in on some of these decisions? Because I think that's really important. I think that you're making a lot of decisions for families and kids and their lives in the absence of the very people you're making decisions for. And I personally would like to be included on your decisions. I would like to hear your data. I would like to hear the recent statistics, because my recent statistics are very different than what you report. And I also know that the CDC said today on the website, I have it here, there is no test for the Delta variant. So how are you determining if kids have it? So for now, I don't want to argue all that. I just want to say that I think parents need to be included in on all these decisions. You need to start including parents. Thank you.
One more comment that I have just in regards to this entire topic. I think we have a case study right here in town, right? So the LCC was able to have a summer program at Morris Elementary, half inside, half outside. I would say they were actually more inside than not. No masks were worn. The counselors were all fully vaccinated. I think you said there were something like 59 kids at that camp with no outbreaks, no issues. So I'll leave that as my parting comment, but we do have a case study right here in town that was done for the last 3 months, safely.
Although I would suggest that the local case rate is probably
Can you
different
speak
now.
up, please, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with looking at anything in the past is
Yeah.
it doesn't reflect the present or the future, I guess is what I'm saying.
And I actually agree with Christine, I was gonna say that, because unfortunately, as I was flying home from vacation and masks were still fully in where I was in the state of Hawaii, and you had to be vaccinated to even show up in the state, and children had to have negative tests to even go there. You're seeing from across the nation in different places where this is spreading, and we did open up. We have tourism in Lenox, we have people coming from all over. Provincetown is a little bit of the case study there. It's a much more adult population, so we don't have a lot of child statistics, but I just looked at the metrics. I printed them all out before I came, but I looked at metrics of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and in the 2 weeks, the increase in testing positive from children under the age of 12, which would be the non-vaccinated. I mean, it was hard. I was kind of looking to break it out, quite frankly, to get a little bit more, dial in a little bit deeper about how sick. I mean, we talk about the flu, we talk about getting sick, we've all experienced that, but then I've experienced within people that I know closely, as well as very, very closely, people that are outside of the, elderly demographic who are so sick. And so the second we start going into this conversation about the flu, I think we get into, an unfair conversation. I'm not a medical person, but anecdotally, I can certainly talk about people who would say, I've had the flu, and this is not the flu. And again, some people do fine with it. They get better, they're fine. But how do we look at the risk factors of how sick children are gonna get? And even though we did have summer camp, this Delta variant wasn't out there and these higher transmissions of people who've been vaccinated wasn't there. We're getting that information in looking at the 2-week metrics. And as Christine said, we moved from green to red in a pretty short amount of time. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm the expert, but I do think, and the recommendations from both the MASC and DESE, is that we do have a public meeting where maybe the only agenda item, after having a meeting with the health professionals, after having a meeting with our professionals from the LEA, that we then have an open meeting where we have conversations and present. And with all due respect, you know, your data and my data, we can have a conversation and debating the data, and unless all of us are heading to an emergency room or the infectious disease, you know, we have physicians on this panel, you know, to the extent that we should absolutely hear from parents, we should. The people on this board were elected to make decisions and to support our professionals, the people that work in our schools.
No, you were elected to represent us, I'm
No,
sorry.
we were elected to make decisions based upon, you know, being informed and to do that work. And also, we're fortunate how many school committees also have members of the community that are from, you know, engineering and medicine. And, you know, so I think that as the situation changes or doesn't change, if it stays the way it is, we've got basically we've got 3 weeks until school starts. We continue the conversation and we hear from parents and families, as well as having had the conversations with medical professionals. So I think there's just still a lot to talk about, and obviously, yeah, the information is important, and we get it from all sources and try to analyze it as best we can.
Could we make a suggestion maybe to meet, would next Monday work? Does that give us time? It sounds like we might have some other inputs that we could review.
You mean next Monday for a school committee meeting?
Yeah, establish a school
Or next Monday for a parent meeting?
Well, if it's a school committee meeting
Just
called
have
as a public, I'm sorry, Christine.
Oh, no. I
apologize.
think we're saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should put it on the agenda that we are all here with notice to the public and perhaps put ourselves, I'll go so far as, if weather permitting, that we got ourselves in the beautiful bandstand in town and we ask people to come and we set up some microphones and we're there. And we think in terms of how we're modeling safe social distancing. We also talk about how much students can be educated outside, so risk masks if that's an issue. And all these things come forward for open conversation with our community. And then we can either choose, if it's not appropriate for a vote that night, we can do it at our next public meeting. But when people say, you know, we feel like you're not hearing from us, we say this is your opportunity to be heard. Again, knowing that the information continues to change. So whatever we're saying tonight could be different a week from now, for the better or for the worse. We're hoping obviously for the better based upon.
I think there's definitely a sense of urgency. You know, school starts in 3 weeks. Parents have asked me, you know, what's the plan? What's going back to school look like? And I don't have an answer for them right now. So we do need to, you know, make a decision and have a rational conversation. And I think you're right, including parents is absolutely key. But 3 weeks is not that long. It really isn't.
Yeah, I'm not going to direct the committee on what to do at all. But to your point, there is a sense of urgency that I think we have to really wrap our minds around because, you know, for teachers, principals, families, you know, there's a lot of logistics that have to happen. If we're talking about securing, you know, different care options, that is a whole another, you know, hurdle for families to try to get through. But, you know, if Brenda has to change, you know, how kids are going to eat, she's got very limited time to start planning that, making sure we have enough furniture. So there's a lot of things that, you know, are going to be incumbent upon us to be able to move pretty quickly. So, you know, we have to, I think, come up with something. I mean, and it doesn't have to be a forever thing either. I've seen some communities now are saying, this is our plan for 30 days. And so they're, you know, setting these smaller term kind of buckets, right? And so we can do something like that too. But I think it would be in everyone's best interest, and I'm just going to speak my truth. As a superintendent, but also as a parent, you know, I want to know what's going on for my own kids, right? So I think families would be able to breathe, you know, some collective sigh of relief. Even if it's not the solution they love, at least they know what to expect. I think for me, the one thing I'm the most excited about is the fact that kids are going to be in school. So, you know, I think we'll work through some of the details, but I'm so happy that, you know, we're opening, you know, school in buildings. And so that to me is the biggest win in the whole thing. I don't want to lose sight of that.
And it's really not just as black and white as are children going to be wearing masks or not. You know, I, as a parent, want to know, what is school lunch looking like? Are they going to be eating back in the cafeteria as a group again? personally, I don't see any reason why there should be no talking while your mask is off. I think we're a little bit past that. There's a lot that goes into this, not just, okay, we're gonna vote and people are gonna be wearing masks, or we're gonna vote and people aren't gonna be wearing masks. You know, there's, what's the classroom dynamic look like? I know, I'm sure a lot of the teachers are curious, you know, what is my classroom going to look like come September?
Yeah, we're gonna do 3 feet of spacing, 6 feet of
Right.
spacing, no spacing, all of those things have massive
Yes.
repercussions across the system.
And if I can just point out because I believe this is correct and that'll be a minimum requirement, is that DESE has required that anyone on public transportation, meaning busing transportation, say public meaning because it's community transportation rather than your own car, will be masked. And that anyone who is in a health area, the nurse's office, for example, will be masked. So that's already a mandate and something that we, you know, that we have to follow that. And that's just so people are aware of that in case they thought, oh, buses, we won't be masked, but buses, you will be masked if you're on a bus. Am I correct?
Yeah,
about
that is correct.
And that's already a DESE protocol. I think that's important. And then the question I have too, and because I was not on the committee when a lot of the building changes is, and it sounds like a silly one, but maybe not when it comes to acquisition of things, is that the issue of air purification systems. So some communities are using, you know, or even in your own home, you might have an air purification system in a room. So was that part of last year's? And again, I'm looking at Dr. Gosselin, but maybe the other school committee members who predate me would know whether we acquired a significant number of air purification systems. Because again, talking about that, well, there's air purification. Obviously, I think hand washing and sanitizers and all of those things are part of the new purchase system, I assume, because that's what we're doing. But air purifiers, I don't know whether a significant number were purchased.
We had extensive meetings,
Okay.
24 meetings with the LEA last summer, and hammered out, you know, guidelines for when a classroom would be, you know, based on air quality and whatever, and how many air exchanges and all that. So
that's been dealt with and is ongoing.
Yeah, it didn't feel like more than 23 really, Bob, but.
Well, it did. Sometimes it was 4 a week.
But yeah, anywhere that didn't have the appropriate air exchange, the district invested in air purifiers, and yeah, so that.
That's already there, so that's good.
And the
All of that
HVAC
has been
systems are
established.
upgraded and the filters changed.
Yeah, all the filtering, yeah.
You know, I like what what Oren was saying. You know, it's almost like we're starting with zero-based budgeting. You know, it's the guidance that's coming from DESE, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, from the CDC. Really, when you look at what they're talking about, they're not talking about things such as social distancing within the classrooms. What seems to be an issue is, in some way, mitigating, actually, and I think in a lot of ways, how to bring a uniformed, least disruptive policy throughout the district. And, you know, and I think that we should focus on having one policy, having it as soon as possible, and having it, and saying we're gonna update it at some point. We're gonna wait and see what happens over the next 30, 60, or 90 days. Because I feel that with Morris, as it's kind of its own little bubble, we still have LMMHS, which is a combination of kids who are not eligible to have a vaccine, with students who are and who may or may not. So I think a lot of the consideration, and I think a uniform approach to this, at least in the short term and as soon as possible, I think would address a lot of those, a lot of these issues. And I think giving people the idea that, this is, we're taking this, we're going to be readdressing this as perhaps guidance changes, but I really can't see how you can have a school with, 6th graders, wearing masks, unvaccinated, with 7th graders vaccinated, with not wearing masks, and maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's overlap with teachers, maybe there's overlap with administration personnel. It just seems really, really complicated to at least, you know, in the beginning, to take the steps that we are able to take to, you know, to protect the students in the short term. You know, I think there was an analogy of comparing COVID to you know, kids in car accidents. Well, it's almost right there, but really you got to compare masks, social distancing, not to the car. You've got to compare it to the seatbelt, to the airbag. And is the mask, you know, social distancing a seatbelt? Is it add an extra layer of protection? Does the mask, you know, is that the airbag? Does it, until we know what's really going on, does it just add a little bit extra layer of protection and security that we agree is not optimal, that no one wants, but maybe, and that we should readdress as the world, as data changes?
If I just offer two thoughts. One is, I at least am very frustrated to hear people saying they don't feel we can move forward now when this was on the agenda last time, and the choice at that point was we needed to schedule a meeting in early August specifically to discuss this. We found a date that would be convenient for everybody in August with the specific understanding that this was the topic that needed to be discussed. And so to hear that we are not actually prepared to discuss it is certainly very disappointing to me, and I think is a real failure of the committee vis-a-vis the parents, the teachers, the administration. And so if we cannot make a decision, so be it, but I certainly hope we redouble our efforts to dig in on this. The second thing I would say, and I hope this is something that we could do tonight, is I do think it's very important, if we want to gather more data, if we want to hear more input, so be it. But I think we are all in position to make clear the basis on which we are going to make the decision, how we want to evaluate the data. And one thing that is concerning about the way this conversation is proceeding is there seems to be a real confusion between spread of the virus and effects of the virus. There's no question the virus is spreading. There's a very large question, or rather I think the data is quite definitive that for children and for people who are vaccinated, it does not pose a different threat from the kind that we've seen from all infections. I mean, tens of thousands of children are hospitalized every year with respiratory problems. In Massachusetts last week, and this is through August 7th, so current data, 1 child was hospitalized with COVID. The week before, 0 children were hospitalized with COVID. And so, you know, when you start looking at the data, whether it's national for Massachusetts, to find the breakthrough infection rates, let alone hospitalization rates, let alone death rates, you start having to count the zeros after the decimal point. And so the question I would pose, and I hope we could discuss now, is just what are we looking for? Because to Megan's point, it's not going to be eradicated. You know, we will see when a vaccine is authorized, even provisionally for kids, but I think we're headed toward winter for that probably, at which point you need 2 shots plus after that. Plus frankly, the uptake's just not gonna be that high for kids. Anyone who thinks we're gonna get above 50% kids fully vaccinated before the end of the school year, I think is being extremely optimistic. And so the question in my mind is just what is it that we're looking for? Delta is certainly different in terms of infectiousness and spread. But we know, for instance, from the UK, which already went through its surge a few months ago, kids were in school unmasked through the Delta surge. We have the outcome there. And so, you know, I've said what I think we should be looking at, which is, do we see hospitalization and death rates for children and for vaccinated people that look different from the standard of all of the diseases that we cope with? If if other folks have a different standard we should be using, I think that would be a great thing to discuss. But that seems to me to really be the heart of the question. And on that question, I think we actually have 16 months of data. We actually have a lot of data at this point on that particular point.
So, Orin, what, based on everything you said, which I'm not arguing with, what then do you conclude should be the position of the Lenox School District?
I would like to see us adopt a policy that says we are going to offer as normal an educational environment as we can while complying with all federal, state, and local mandates. So if DESE realizes actually we need to mandate masks, then we should wear masks. If the town public health department says everyone needs to wear masks, then everyone should wear masks. But to go beyond that in the school setting without any differential evidence of risk in the school setting, I don't think it's justified.
So right now, DESE doesn't say mandate, but they say recommend, or maybe strongly recommend. So are you suggesting that we don't adopt that language?
No, I think the fact that they strongly recommended, in fact, underscores that they don't think everyone should do it, right? If DESE thought everybody had to do this, they could mandate it. If you look at why they strongly recommend, they specifically say it's going to be sort of a whole bunch of factors you have to take into consideration. And I can't think of a place more to the low risk side, frankly, than Lenox, Massachusetts. So, you know, the idea that DESE sort of, we can attribute whatever motivations we want to DESE, but at the end of the day, the idea that DESE didn't say we have to do this, but we conclude from that that means we have to do it, I think would be a misreading of what they did.
And just to be clear, DESE was very clear that, you know, whatever decision we make, if a student chooses to wear a mask, that is absolutely their right to do so. We have no right to say, you know, nobody's wearing masks. That's not happening. There, you know, either way, there will be children in masks in school this upcoming year, and that's really up to the child and their parents and their families.
Again, so the struggle I'm having, Orin, about this issue of, you're saying, well, we should be voting, and I do want to just ask you to be careful with your words about things like failure. I don't think we failed at anything. I literally was reading an article from the Boston Globe yesterday about the changes that have happened. We are a community. We are not in a little island. You know, I'm reading also a dystopian novel that talks about walled off communities. You know, this is a highly active and movement tourist community. So we have people within our community, again, who we don't know if they're masked or not. We don't know how the transmission is. So the numbers are changing. So I don't think it's a failure on anyone's part to not be prepared to vote tonight. Quite frankly, there was nothing more fun than walking around town and not carrying my mask with me and not having my car stocked. I think a lot of us did that. We are in different communities where everybody's setting different policies based upon the numbers and the metrics. And the fact that we're now looking at Berkshire County being a red zone as opposed to a green zone means maybe Lenox isn't, although our numbers have ticked up. It does mean that it's changing. So I think that having a policy that we look at, now for example, if the vote, I said if because I don't know if we're going to vote on it tonight or not, there's no motion before us, was to say we're going to agree that every person in the building is going to wear a mask, then the corollary vote to that should be, and we're going to look at the numbers and we're going to address this at every meeting, every time. If, for example, we say we're not going to mandate any masks, but anybody who wants to wear a mask may, then we're going to address that at every time based upon you know, what the metrics are and what we're finding within our community. And I think that also suggests that children, whether they are hospitalized or not, cannot be the source of other people within their communities being highly vulnerable. I read WHO, I read CDC, I read DESE, I read the legal memos, I read them all. And a lot of the conversation is about the fact that no child lives on their own. They're not an island. They live in communities of people who have cancer or who are trying to get pregnant, quite frankly. I mean, I had a conversation with someone recently who was like, it's really embarrassing. People keep asking me if I got vaccinated, and the truth is, I'm trying to have a baby, and I don't know if that baby, you know, there's no testing, there's no information. So we really have to recognize that our children don't live on their own. They live in communities, and they can then infect people close to them. We just traveled, and someone in our family was going to be announced by a vulnerable child, so they went and got a test. So the other thing we're not addressing right now is how accessible can we have testing in our buildings? I don't know how much testing was happening last year, again, because I wasn't on the committee and we were kind of wrapping things up. But now testing is more available. You can go to CVS and actually get a rapid test. That wasn't available at the beginning of last year. You couldn't even get a test unless you got, or if you had to pay for it. So we also have the issue of vaccination. There was a period of time where, I don't know about you, but I was sitting online trying to book vaccinations for everybody in my family, like I was in a casino. It was ridiculous. Now we can ask CHP to bring a van to our community and say, if there's anybody that's having trouble getting a vaccine, please let us know, and we're happy to provide that for you. Because we can do that now. And again, there's a lot of guidance from Desi and others about how do we provide more vaccinations for people who aren't able to get them. Because again, this idea that they're available for everybody, there's a lot of access issues. There's fear, there's languages, and there's a lot of recommendations about campaigns about please getting vaccinated. I think there are teenagers that are somewhere in between on that. Our numbers are high, but they're at 70%. They're not at 90% or 85%. So I think we have to look again at our testing policy. How do we ramp that up a little bit? Because we are seeing the numbers go up so that we can catch it. Some schools are doing, what do they call it, the community testings based upon water supply or whatever. So, do we have that in place? So before we make a decision about whether, if we say, okay, well, masks aren't going to be mandated, wear them if you want, I feel that might be irresponsible if we didn't also have a testing policy and offer vaccines for people who are too embarrassed to say they haven't been able to get them. I helped some people who work full-time as hourly wage people who couldn't go get vaccines because they were going to lose income that's vital to their support. Again, equity. We think about, well, anyone can go get one, take a day off work. Not people who get paid by the hour and don't get paid. So how do we provide more vaccinations, more testing? We've talked about resources around, air purity. And then also how do we think in terms of a constant revisiting of the issue of masks? I think it would be somewhat irresponsible also if we told all of our families right now, no masks, you're good. Because in 2 weeks, that might not be a responsible decision. So,
but then again, the families always have the choice to choose to mask.
Exactly.
But that doesn't necessarily protect everybody in the building. So if a family's choosing to mask, they're saying, oh, well, we don't need masks. I mean, it's also our job to talk about what we think is necessary. So I'm not, believe me, I have enjoyed not wearing my mask. But I wore it for 24 hours on a flight for vacation, and I wore it in places I was mandated to do so. So I'm happy. I don't have a position that I want kids to be masked. I think it's really hard for them, but I also think the information in the last 3 weeks has been changing, and we have to think in terms of that. And I want to see us have testing and have vaccinations for people who haven't been able to get them in connection with this decision that we're making, and that we have it revisited, and then we say, for this 3-week period or this 2-week period, and like you said, Oren, like that we look at, okay, what are the things that are going to cause us to change our minds about that? And I don't know, because I can't predict the future. I'd love to, but I can't.
In a way, I think you kind of just hammered home Oren's point, though. We have so much work to do in 3 weeks, and as a committee member, I'm a little bit embarrassed that we haven't done more work over the last couple of months, knowing very well that school starts in 3 weeks. It's not just as simple as saying, are students and teachers going to be wearing masks or are they not? Like you said, what are we doing about pooled testing? What's the protocol if we do pooled testing and an asymptomatic person tests positive? Then what? There's a lot of things we need to think about that are, being put in our laps here to decide on. And I'm not really quite sure, or I'm not quite understanding why it seems to be such a difficult, trigger to pull. I don't know how else to word it. I'm sorry.
Well, one thing would be if somebody put a motion on the table, one way or the other, then we could vote. Or, as some of our members here in the audience had suggested, that we get more input from parents, which we could do if we had the meeting next week, and very specifically, publicized. I think it would be, well, it'd be great to do it in public. That might be a better opportunity for it to be a Zoom meeting in terms of the numbers of people who could attend, if we did it next week.
But I think, I hear you on that, Bob, and I think certainly if somebody wants to give a motion, this is the committee, that's what we can do. I think relative to a meeting, I would move that we schedule a meeting, identify to the public that the issue to be presented is the results of the meeting that you're having tomorrow at 2 p.m., the results of the conversation with our LEA, if that negotiation hasn't happened, because I believe that the Mass Association of Teacher, which the LEA is a subset of, has a separate set of requested guidance. And so that we have those meetings, and so that we're prepared on Monday to say, here are the things that we're proposing that we do, that we hear from the public, and then we move forward. If somebody wants to make a motion today, of course, that's appropriate to do that. But again, I think we're looking at metrics from the last 2 weeks that have changed from the 2 weeks before that. And that's the struggle that I'm having. In this, also struggling with the concept of what is normal. As Megan has said, the new normal is that we're dealing with a virus, but it's also a virus that, what are we at, like 600,000 people in the United States died from, as well as millions around the world, which is a little bit different than the flu. And I think, we're also dealing with that. And I'm not in a strong position of saying, I want masks or don't. I'm just worried about what the new information that's coming out.
I think it would make sense. I think the point that we are going to have to revisit this is exactly right, and I've certainly tried, in the memos I've sent the committee to emphasize that this is obviously always subject to what we learn, not a policy we put in place permanently. But exactly to that point, I think we should act as if school were starting tomorrow, and say what the policy would be if school were starting tomorrow, because that will at least give teachers and students and everybody else a sense of where we are. And if next week we have new and different information and need to change the policy, then so be it. So I'll introduce a motion if folks don't want to support it and want to introduce a different one. That's certainly fine as well, but I hope that we will leave having passed something that puts a marker down for where we are at this moment until we're able to get somewhere else. So my motion would be that subject to changing conditions and data and to be revisited at each meeting of the school committee, the policy of the Lenox Public Schools is to provide students with as normal an educational environment as possible while complying with all federal, state, and local mandates. And the superintendent will issue written guidance for how school buildings will comply with any such mandates.
Can you restate about the second half of that, just a little slower?
Sorry, what was the second half?
So I have,
well, I'll pick up at...
Change conditions and revisited by the school committee, provide as normal a school environment as possible. That's how far I got.
While complying with all federal, state, and local mandates, and the superintendent will issue written guidance for compliance within the school buildings with any mandates.
The superintendent will issue
Written guidance.
Have you got that, Amy?
I got written guidance, yeah.
Is there a second?
Can you elaborate that a little bit more? I'm just struggling to understand what that would mean from now until September 2nd.
Well, I think at this moment it would mean Dr. Goslin or our legal advisors would need to identify any mandates that are in place. Ronnie mentioned the bus mandates, for instance. And conversely, I believe DESE has set some mandates saying that, for instance, you cannot be masked on playgrounds and so forth.
Okay.
And so we would need a clear policy guidance to Principal Knievel and Principal Kelly saying, here's anything we've identified that needs to affect how the schools operate, and other than that, we should be striving to operate a normal school year.
I think that's a sensible starting point, and I'll second that motion.
So the major point that's jumping out to me is it's so narrowly circumscribed that I think essentially we're leaving the school district out to dry. You only talked about mandates, and there are very few mandates in here. There are a lot of recommendations. I think at a minimum, we have to at least respect and echo the recommendations. I would feel very uncomfortable not taking a stance at a minimum in line with DESI and CDC. I don't think I actually, in good conscience, could ever even vote for that, where we don't at least say, we recommend that you mask. So I can't support something that's just limited to mandates.
And I would move to amend your motion to change the word from mandates to recommendations of Department of Education, DESI, because that is our guiding organization and they are in conversation. So my motion to amend is to put recommendations in place of the word mandate. So that's the actual motion.
It's a totally different motion than, no.
Well, no, but that's under the rules of Robert's Rules of Order. I have just made a motion to amend, so it's either
No, I
seconded.
understand.
So if it's seconded, then we can then discuss whether that makes sense or not. If anyone wants to second that. So then, I guess what's before the committee now is the amendment, because the motion was given and seconded. What's before it now is the amendment, so perhaps we'll debate that and then we can vote on that.
Could we have a reading of the amended motion?
Yes. So I guess it would read, subject to changing conditions and to be revisited by the school committee at each meeting to provide as normal a school environment as possible while complying with all state and federal recommendations. Mandates, and with the superintendent to issue written guidance. So all I did was substitute the word recommendations for mandate. That's what you were asking.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any discussion on that?
Well, so I'm sorry, Ronnie, so did you want to just comply with DESI or do you want to comply with all CDC guideline recommendations as well?
Well, I believe that, because I'm responding to your motion was to comply with local, state, and federal mandates. Local, state, and federal recommendations is different in federal. I think that we have the Department of Education, and we could further amend that to be DESI recommendations, because I think, and I understand where this leads us.
Because there are conflicts between CDC and DESI, so I think we would.
Right, well, I know, and so I think DESI is giving its recommendations based upon its analysis of the CDC as well as other organizations that are local to Massachusetts. So we're not dealing with what's happening in other parts of the country, we're dealing with something more local, which I think is appropriate. Also, locally, we're dealing with shifting recommendations. For example, we have new policies coming into town even about wearing masks in our town buildings. So, I think my request to amend was to include recommendations, as Christine discussed, rather than mandates, because I think the recommendations take into consideration what's happening locally. I understand that if that motion passes, it means a second motion has to follow about what are we actually doing about masks. But your chosen language was mandates and normal, and I think we have to define what that is. What is normal? What is a mandate? If right now, I believe DESI is recommending masks for people who are unvaccinated in communities where there's a potential of increased transmission and watching those numbers. I mean, that's the recommendation as of today. The recommendation next week may change. So I think that puts us,
Yeah, I think the difference is that we're not likely to get mandates.
Yeah.
We're gonna get recommendations. No one, the Board of Health here is probably not gonna give a mandate. Jim Willis is not gonna, he'll give his updated numbers, but he's not, I don't believe we're gonna get a mandate locally. We're definitely not getting a mandate from DESI. So the difference is, because I think we could wait forever for a mandate, if that's what we wanted. We might not want that, but I think a lot of people were looking for DESI to be a little bit more definite one way or the other. I think you might argue that, well, they have been definite by saying that we recommend it rather than require it.
But just, sorry.
Yeah, no, just go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so for instance, DESI specifically recommends that vaccinated students remain unmasked.
Right.
So
unless they choose to do otherwise.
What's that?
Unless they choose otherwise.
Right.
Right, yes, exactly. So if we are adopting the DESI recommendations, I believe that conflicts with CDC. So I think we should just, and I guess this would be an amendment to the amendment, that gets a little messy. So I might ask instead if you could
The amendment to the amendment is actually out of order under the Robert's Rules of Order.
Right,
You
so-
can't amend an amendment.
Fair enough, so I guess my point would just be, I think the right way to affect what you're describing would be to say that the policy of the school committee is to affect the recommendations of DESI. Is that right? Okay.
Well, and I look at the page 2 of the memo from DESI, which again is a week ago, and separate from what, and it said, strongly recommend that all students in kindergarten through grade 6 wear masks when indoors. And so they have strongly recommend, but at least I think that if we have recommendations rather than mandates, we still engage in this conversation and we still take a look, because what's not before the group here is the other precautionary issues such as testing and increased vaccination, trying to get, more people to feel comfortable and to actually, if it's access is an issue that's preventing vaccination, so that there's other corollary things that we're doing. And so when we do the motion, that's fine. If we had our policy all written out, which again, I think if we had written it 30 days ago, it might change from what we're learning in the last 30 days. So if we say recommendations, then we have the ability to keep doing what we're doing, which is to look at all the different pieces that are in place.
I have some concerns about that. I feel that if we are requiring the school superintendent to follow the recommendations as written, it limits him in what he can do. I think and it creates a bit of a nightmare for the administration, because now you're going to have a situation where you've got masked kids just thinking LMHS. If he follows only the recommendations, then he's got vaccinated kids who are unmasked, but now how are we going to know who's vaccinated and who isn't? We're going to have a school with a mixture of unvaccinated and maybe vaccinated, and you're going to have to how are you going to police the unmasked? And just regarding, just regarding outreach and wanting to increase vaccination rates and testing, that's all well and good, but we have to look at the world today and the world in the next 3 weeks. And if we require him to adhere to DESI guidance, I think it's just going to create a huge logistical nightmare for the administration.
Well, I'm not sure that there actually is any enforcement specified in here. I had that question too. My belief is that it's just all on the honor system, unless somebody knows differently, right? We're just asking people to self-identify and then make the appropriate choice.
I don't know that that's the best route. I worry about peer pressure. Are you masked? Are you unmasked? Are you uncomfortable wearing a mask? I'm sure there are kids who would love to wear masks because they get the flu every year a couple of times. But I think they would be I am concerned about how they would feel even under normal circumstances. And now to thrust them into an environment where no one wants to wear one, and now you're saying, well, you don't have to wear one, but I just don't see how it's going to work.
One other thing I would just put out there for your consideration is also the notion that the American Federation of Teachers, which is the national union that largely represents teachers in urban districts, as well as the NEA, the National Education Association, which tends to represent more of your suburban teachers or rural teachers, have both taken position statements urging masking, right? And so there's going to be an issue potentially with staffing and what that might mean, and we could be looking at things like functional closures and these types of issues if we don't bring our teachers into the conversation. And so I think that that's just something that we want to just make sure that we're thinking about, because to me, the most important part is keeping the schools open and keeping kids in the school. But if I start closing the schools because I have high rates of absenteeism, that now has just defeated the whole purpose. Now it's no longer about masking or masking, it's about I can't staff buildings. So I think that we want to be sensitive to that, and I'd love to hear from you guys if you're ready. If you're not ready to talk about that today, I completely understand that, so I'm not putting everybody on the spot. But that's a conversation would have to happen, I think, so that we know if we can even pull this off, moving forward as well. I think that that's an important consideration that, I just want to make sure that we can open schools and we have the staff to do so. I don't want to be chasing, subs that aren't available right now and, trying to staff all these things and, or, trying to provide paraprofessionals to students who have complex needs and also now we can't do that. So it is a logistical nightmare, no matter how you slice it, that's always going to be part of the thing, but I just want to make sure that, we're thinking about some of those, maybe stones we haven't returned over yet and looked underneath yet, and that, to me, labor is one of them.
I can speak to a little bit of that if you'd like.
Go ahead.
Is that okay?
It's up to you.
So I did, you're correct, the MTA, which is underneath the NEA as well, has recommended universal masking. I really listened to what Mr. Rimler says, and I envision that especially at LMMHS being a logistical nightmare, trying to figure out, who's vaccinated and who's not vaccinated. I think Dr. Morrow said that as well, that it makes sense for, if we are going to have a masking policy, for it to be a universal masking policy. I'm curious, I was trying to write notes, and someone said that, Desi said that masks are not allowed on the playgrounds? Is that correct?
No, the recommendation is masks are not necessary.
Okay, so I thought someone said not allowed. Because I did have students who, even when we would take mask breaks last year, would leave their masks on outside because, that was where their comfort level was. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have put this out because the guidance from MTA is for us not to propose something that isn't supported by our local, right? NEA, MTA, LEA, all really independent, right? And so I did put a survey out to the staff, and I had relatively good participation. It was either 72 or 82, I can't remember right now how many people responded. And then a number of people, because of the way I sent it out, were not able to respond to the survey, but did respond personally to me. And we're at about, give or take 5%, I would say, 70% of our staff, this is Unit A and Unit C people who we represent, 70% of our staff in favor of masking for all, and approximately 30% in favor of no masking. I did offer a comment portion of that survey, and those, it was an anonymous survey, obviously except for those who reached out to me personally. So I could tell if they voted no what their comment was, right, or yes, vice versa. So a number of the no's said that they wanted mandatory vaccines. A number of the no's said only for unvaccinated students. So the no's weren't 100% no, as it were. But that said, even though it is a majority, it's not an overwhelming majority of our staff. So it really would be something that I would want to dig a little bit deeper in with our membership, and would certainly be ready to engage in any kind of negotiation that would need to take place as a result of that. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for me. I'd be happy to entertain them.
Was there any discussion around quarantine? Because that's the other piece that's come to light as recently as today by the CDC. Recommendations around how many days you need to quarantine if you've been exposed to a student who, or anybody who tests positive.
I didn't include that in the, it was just it was a summer survey, I wanted one question.
I get it.
Yeah, yeah, that's where that was at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I will only say as part of the final, because at some point we've got to vote on the amendment, is the reason that I am, the other reason why I'm saying that we change it to recommendation is because I do think that there's this additional input, which includes the meeting tomorrow, includes an actual bargaining conversation with the teachers about what would happen, and filling in some details around the issues of testing and vaccine availability, as well as input from the public. If we were to schedule a meeting on Monday, perhaps at the end of that meeting, we could then have a policy written out. When we do recommendations, we say recommendations of DESI, and then we can also have another motion that says, and in this case, it is going to be, because really what it's coming down to is, if we don't have mandates, we can still have, if we follow the mandates, we can still have a masking policy. If we follow the recommendations, we can still have a masking policy. If we don't follow the recommendations, we can still have a masking policy. So really what we're talking about in the end is, what is our masking policy? And I don't think it stands alone without the other components. And if we should have had that all written out today, I think again, it would have to be amended based upon new information from people that are gathering to meet and talk about data tomorrow. So that was my reason for changing it to recommendation, because I think we need to continue to revisit it I think, it would be at every school committee meeting.
Yeah, so, I mean, what you're saying, Ronnie, is that if we vote for your amendment, and then if the overall thing passes, we will have set a policy, but that based on the feedback we get tomorrow and through the week and next week, we may vote to change that policy.
Of course.
We may tighten it up to be masks. Right now, if we vote this tonight, it's, as some people have suggested, it's gonna make a very difficult situation for the middle and high school, maybe everybody, but let's say middle and high school, because you're not gonna know who's masked, who's not masked. Could be the peer pressure, whatever. But if we vote for this tonight, then that's where we stand. We're just essentially going with the guidance we have from DESI at this point.
Correct.
That's right. But we may change that based on the feedback we get at the meeting tomorrow, that will get shared with the committee, or information we get up through next Monday, let's say we have a schedule for next Monday.
A thought about the point about labor considerations. I think it would be important to verify what the quarantine policy is, if it has not changed. I think everyone who tests positive is still going to have to be quarantined, which would take out even your vaccinated staff if they test positive. We know that there's a substantial rate of breakthrough transmission right now, and masking would help reduce that.
Is there any further comment?
Yeah, so we're all in agreement that we want school to come back as normal as possible. I don't hear any disagreement on that. I think where we're having a little trouble is coming up with the prescription for what that should look like. I personally don't think that the school committee in its whole should be responsible for setting policy entirely. I think we need to leave a lot of administrative leeway, possibly go back to that steering committee, joint labor management committee model we had in the summer, and through the end of the year, where we had a group that could very closely monitor all these changing variables, have all the stakeholders involved in it, and make decisions on the fly as necessary as conditions change. And also set some metrics. And maybe just have the school committee be sort of oversight on top of that, because I don't think it's going to be practical for us to meet whenever a piece of data changes and we want to do something different. And then we'll get into a debate like we're having tonight, which has been, despite your initial comment about not having a discussion, we're having a very good discussion about this. So, to me, I think we need to leave some latitude to the administration and have informed people who agree on the facts when they're talking about them, and where they disagree on the facts, hammer out some ground that they do agree on and make their decisions. Otherwise, it's one side with their data and one side with the other data, and you never get anywhere. So that's why I supported the amendment, is because I thought it opened up some latitude in the administrative ability to do things. That's my position. So.
Yeah, see, I was viewing it slightly differently. I was viewing that if we voted for this amendment and then ultimately the motion, we were marrying ourselves to this policy. I mean, I know, although I think you did say in the motion that at subsequent school committee meetings we would address it. So Yeah.
I would just add, I think there's always an implementation step. I mean, the model I'd like to see, and I think it's contained in the motion now, is you have a body that sets policy, and you have an executive that has to implement the policy. And this is the same fight they have in Washington over all the time, where some agency tries to implement a law and they have to figure it out. So it seems like the policy of the school committee would be DESI recommendations govern, and that would still leave Dr. Goslin to translate that into what that means for the schools at any point in time. And we've already identified some things that DESI obviously does not cover, that would still be latitude for the superintendent, but it would ultimately have to come back to the school committee if, I suppose if DESI were to change its recommendations, one of the nice things is, they could react quickly to something and Dr. Goslin could immediately implement that without coming back to us. It would need to come back to us if we decided we wanted to depart from whatever DESI was recommending.
Or if it was vague.
Sorry?
Or if it was vague. It was unclear.
Yes, he could certainly, right, and he could certainly
It was
come back to
unclear
us
what
and
that
say,
meant, yeah.
we're not sure.
My experience with DESI last year is they were not very timely. They were 3-4 weeks longer. And that's one of my concerns would be wedded to their recommendations is they may not be timely enough. Good or bad, right? They may be saying you have to continue wearing a mask, we think everything's fine, we want to take everything off and go back to normal.
I mean, I agree with you on this point. I don't think the DESI recommendation here is especially good. I think the question is, if we can't both say, we need to defer to what DESI says, but also we think we can be able to follow DESI. There's probably.
Well, I agree.
But with all due respect, I disagree with that, because we can actually. If you look at our calendar, we meet approximately every 3 weeks. We have to give, I'm gonna look to Amy, because she's the one that said 48 hours notice to any public meetings.
2 business days.
2 business days, okay, so I translate that, but yeah, because it has to be business days. So 2 business days to schedule a meeting. We have people within our community that are monitoring this on a regular basis. So if for some reason there's new information that says we should do things differently, and DESI's slow on it, I think there's the ability to address it at a meeting or call a meeting if it's important. I mean, I think again, like we do the best we can. I think DESI, as imperfect as it is, and there's a lot of things I disagree with, they are trying to do what we're all trying to do, which is in the best interest of our kids, but it also recognizes that our kids live in families, communities, they have parents and grandparents, and we've lived through a lot, but, I think ultimately we're all trying to get to that, that best practice, and everybody is talking about being back in school, which feels like a huge win, and a removal of some significant strain on communities and families as well, their children being at school learning.
So I have a question. As the amendment stands, should the superintendent wish to go beyond the recommendation, does our motion allow him to do that? I think not.
No, I don't.
Correct, yeah, I agree.
I think not, I think correct.
You're bound
Yeah,
to
that was
it.
what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think that the recommendations sometimes are a little wiggly, in
Well,
which
no-
case we look at the issues of our community. But I think that's why it's, the state rather than looking at the federal. Because I think if we really focus on DESI and also local regulations, because obviously if our town makes a decision that differs from DESI, we have to follow our town, because we're in the town and everybody's here. So
we
I
have no-
think,
we have no local flexibility, in other words.
if our local town passed a mask mandate, I think we have to follow it.
No, but but we have, as a school committee, are basically handing all decisions over to DESI.
Any decisions DESI wants to make.
Any decision DESI wants to make. So we're bound by DESI
Wait,
with this motion.
So point of clarification on Amy's part, because again, she had to type
There is no
it.
mention of DESI in either the motion or the amendment. It says state and federal mandates, which was changed to state and federal recommendations.
And to
that's
my
why I
point,
suggested it should really specifically say DESI recommendations.
so to my point, because it's my motion that's been seconded, I would withdraw my motion and make a motion to amend the terms following all local, state, and federal mandates to local mandates and state well, I will just say DESE, because the state's different, like DESE's doing
Yeah,
its
yeah.
own. The DESE, Department of Elementary, Secondary Education's recommendations and local mandates, because obviously locally, where they would not be making recommendations, but to the extent that the local mandates differ from DESE regulations, we obviously have to follow our local mandates. And I have seen some stories of that happening within the state.
But there may be a local recommendation which we could then not follow.
Correct.
It's not a mandate.
Correct. A local mandate and a DESE regulation would be my,
Recommendation.
excuse me, DESE, I'm sorry, gotta be clear. DESE recommendation would be what we would follow under my motion.
If I could make one more suggestion before it's seconded, we will have to comply with any federal, state, or local mandates as well.
Of course.
So it should be, I think.
Yes,
and
you're right,
that
you're
it
right.
should, the amendment should be to add after and local mandates and all DESE recommendations, and that would.
Thank you.
So unless the Tri-Town Board of Health or whomever mandates masks, should our superintendent wish to issue universal masking, he can. That's the way this is being written.
No, DESE's recommendation of masking would be what they would follow, and DESE's current recommendation of masking is differentiated based upon the age of children.
And
Right,
vaccination.
so he can't issue
And
a
vaccination.
universal masking mandate, not a masking mandate. He couldn't, he could, well, I guess in the school would be mandate. He could not say universal mandate for Lenox under this motion.
I don't think that's correct, because that's not what the recommendations of DESE are.
Right, but,
And the recommendations of DESE may change
right, but.
based upon the state.
But if they don't, he can't issue a universal mask mandate for the school.
He can't go any further.
Without coming back to us.
He can't go
Any
further.
further than what's.
Without
yeah.
coming back to
Yeah.
us, in which case
That's
we
how I
would
take it.
convene with 2 business days' notice, and if his recommendation is, I'm seeing some things that are really concerning, I wanna, I mean, this is what I think, why I'm requesting the motion, and I can really articulate it as a motion to be seconded. The reason I'm doing that is because I recognize, the other option would be to table this for next week to have more conversations and then have a recommendation from the superintendent and then vote on it. But still, that's gonna have to be subject to revision at any time that we're there.
I mean, but then why limit him to DESE? I mean, why limit it? Why not take into account, why make it tighter? Why not broaden it to have greater option? And for that regard, why not add the American Academy of Pediatrics? I mean.
Well, the reason I think we look at DESE is because DESE is talking to the American Academy of Pediatrics as well as the CDC as well as.
Their guidelines are also much more intense and strict than DESE's are, so I would just be
They are.
hesitant in that.
But I mean, we're narrowing it, we're giving him fewer options rather than more by reworking it. We've eliminated CDC, right? We
haven't eliminated it,
We've
we're
eliminated
just not
their
relying on
guidance. We've eliminated, we've got DESE guidance. So we've narrowed it to what, state, DESE and state? Is that?
No, state, local, and federal mandates, meaning laws, rules, regulations that are required.
Mandates are off the table. We figure there aren't going to be any mandates.
Right.
So we shouldn't even.
No, I think I want to be clear. We've had mandates in the state where you had, the governor of Massachusetts has said you have to wear masks in certain places, and we have not. DESE has done something slightly less than that and given guidance and recommendations based upon the people that we're dealing with in our schools. So knowing, David, that what we had before us was a seconded motion with looking for DESE mandates. So the reason why I requested that we change that to recommendations was the recognition that DESE, the state, the local, and federal government may or may not give mandates, but DESE is likely not to. So the idea of the recommendations is as strong as we're going to get, and my feeling is that DESE is the governing body that is looking at a lot of this for us, rather than the 7 of us trying to analyze and debate over who's the better arbiter of what's safe and what's not. We're looking to the guiding organization that says, right now, I mean, DESE's recommendations, but that's from July 30th, and I'm anticipating something might change, maybe not. It says, strongly recommend that all students in kindergarten through grade 6 wear masks when indoors. except students who cannot do so. Masks are not necessary outdoors, and we kind of feel pretty, I saw a lot of heads nodding about that, and maybe remove while eating indoors. DESE and DPH also strongly recommend that unvaccinated staff in all grades, unvaccinated students in grades 7 and above, also wear masks in alignment with statewide advisory. So I understand you're not getting a universal masking policy with DESE's recommendation, but as opposed to a nobody wears masks under because there's no mandate. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I hear a different argument though. I think what I'm hearing is, why are we hitching the decision-making to DESE, who may be slower in responding, right? So if I were to look at my crystal ball, I would guess we won't hear from DESE again until November, maybe even December. So then that could potentially limit our ability to be more nimble and responsive if we wanted to be, right? Because now we're kind of hitched to DESE's wagon. So I think that's the way that I'm interpreting it, unless I'm missing part of the motion.
I think we're on the same page as you think. I think my concern, I'm going to be really candid with everybody, is I would love it if we could successfully say right now that masks won't be mandated, but I'm not confident that that's safe for everybody or something that's acceptable to the LEA, which is why my recommendation is that we have a meeting about this next week. But recognizing that I'm the one that keeps talking about Robert's Rules of Order, there was a motion that was seconded. The motion that was seconded would be relying only on mandates, which at this point don't exist. And so my motion to amend, I'll just restate it in case anybody wants to second it, is that we follow local, state, and federal mandates about our COVID response with regard to masking, and that we follow DESE recommendations, policies to be implemented by the superintendent based upon the original language of Mr. Cass's motion, and that we revisit it at appropriate times as we need to.
So if this amended motion carries, we would not then meet next week and not get these additional inputs.
I think they're two separate, I mean, because Mr. Cass's motion was seconded, and then I've just filed a motion, I've requested a motion to amend, I'd withdrawn the other motion. Now, whether or not it's seconded comes to the issue of debate, but if you're just getting a point of clarification from me, I think we could still meet after getting the health information. I always want to hear from our very important teachers and staff who have to live with this every day, and then continue the decision making. I think that it feels like there's this real intensity that we need to know today, and I feel like what we know today from DESE is one thing, and then maybe next week or the week after it will change based upon more information, because it seems to be moving daily.
And remember that voting on Veronica's amendment, we still didn't have to vote on
the motion.
On the motion, the main motion. So there'll be two votes necessary depending on what.
Ronnie, I think I missed the middle part. I have follow state and local mandates and DESE recommendations and revisit at appropriate times. But I think he's in the middle.
So I think that the only things that I would be changing from what Mr. Cass stated would be follow all local, state, and federal mandates, which existed. So really I was adding the phrase and DESE recommendations. That's the added phrase.
Because I don't think, he didn't use the word local in his, he used state and federal, and I thought I heard you say local.
I thought he said local initially.
If he didn't and you didn't get it, I will defer to Mr. Cass that it was his intent.
I thought local
because I
was in
don't
there
see a
anyway.
situation if we had a town mandated mask policy that wouldn't be able to not follow it, or that would be a
So
good,
the original.
Or we could secede, I suppose, but that would be a longer meeting.
and very expensive.
And this is already a long.
Depends on the vote. This we're just getting started.
Sorry, Amy.
So the original motion has local, state, and federal mandates?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Now, is there a second for Ronnie's amendment? I'll second it.
Do we,
Can I make a discussion, since it's already been seconded, before you vote?
I was just gonna see if anybody else had a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna see if anybody else had anything further they wanted to do before we vote.
I mean, I think regardless, I'm gonna suggest that we still meet and that we still, I mean, I think the points that you just outlined that we want to, and the groups we want to hear from were very sensible, and I would like to hear that again next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thanks. So I have just a couple of thoughts. And
Could you
one of
just
them-
get your, just say
Oh,
again,
again,
just-
Kristen Moriarty, 279 Housatonic Street. One thought is that if you do end up choosing to follow DESE guidance recommendations that says they're strongly encouraged to wear masks, I caution you not to harass or pressure anybody who doesn't wear one, and even the form of asking, "Where's your mask?" when you come in the door can be seen as harassment. The other thing is that I noticed as soon as the air was put on, everybody who'd been wearing a mask for the last 2.5 hours went, "Ah." So I know that Morris doesn't have central air in the building, and if you do end up going with a mask mandate, I ask you to think about the fact that we are still in summer and we are under climate change, and the temperature, the weather that we experience in this part of the country is different than when the school was built in 1997. And so, Bob, I'm coming for your building committee. I'll help you fundraise for central air for that school. My kids probably won't be there anymore, but I think it's important.
That'd be 2 or 3 million by itself.
Yeah, that's a long one. And
It's a good thing the finance committee folks aren't still here.
And I also caution you to be really specific with your language. So when you say words like substantial, that's an objective word about what is substantial for the rate of transmission or the rate of hospitalizations and things like that. So I just ask you to think really carefully about the words. You know, we are in the red now, but it's mostly because of North Adams, which really doesn't mostly affect Lenox, and we are moving away from a majority. I know that there's still leaf peepers coming in the fall, but we are moving away from as many people normally inhabiting Lenox as typically happens over the summer. So just to think about those nuanced things rather than really painting things as a this or a that, and to think creatively about pool testing and like other components of things. And I really understand that time is of the essence right now and that there's a lot of logistical concerns about it, but that I just ask that you continue to think creatively in the short amount of time that you have.
And I just only want to articulate with respect, because I'm not looking for hyperbole in any way. I don't have a strong position on this. I you know, other than doing what's best, but we don't live in a walled city. So we have staff that live in North Adams, okay? We have people who have families that live in North Adams. We have people that have families that live in Egremont. So when something's happening in one part of the county, it does impact us. We have people going to theater and concerts at MCLA, at Mass MoCA. So we are a connected community. Yes, maybe it's this part, but we know full well that it's our community. That's not a pro or a con, and that's not a hyperbolic. It's just that I really think that language to say that, well, that's not us because we're Lenox, forgets the fact that we have many people that both live outside of Lenox as well as have strong connections where they work, people that work at MCLA, people that work at Simon's Rock. So, you know, unless we had a walled city, which I'm not recommending because I'm reading a book that talks about that and it freaks me out. So, you know, we're not. We can't put a bubble over ourselves. So it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, I understand that. I agree with you.
Just to be clear though, we refer to a nursing home in North Adams, not community spread in North Adams. So
Yeah, and one of the,
And some of those people are staff. A large percentage of those people are staff who are not in the walls.
well, and one of the things that is great about this meeting that we'll have tomorrow, and Jim Willis, who's our Tri-Town Health Director, he knows the specifics of where cases are, and he can say it's not an issue or it is an issue, which he did for Lee last year. We didn't have him as part of our committee initially. I don't know if he joined later or not, but his guidance, he's not going to say you got to do this or not, but he'll know where every case is, and so he'll be able to say very specifically it's a school issue or it's not a school issue.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to move the question.
Okay.
That has to be seconded. I'll second that. It's not debatable.
All in favor? Moving the question.
Of the
Of the
amendment. All in favor of the amendment? Aye.
Aye.
What are we voting on?
The amendment,
The amendment.
The amendment, okay.
which was do you need it restated?
Yeah.
Okay,
No, I don't need it stated.
okay.
I think it would be
I do,
helpful to have
yeah.
it stated.
Okay, so if I can connect with you, Amy, about this, so the only amendments I made to the motion was to add the words "and with the recommendations of the Department of Elementary Secondary Education," which is DESE.
Yeah, and I wrote down that you said and revisit at appropriate times, because that wasn't part of the original.
Okay, yes. And that is part of the amendment, if that's still,
So for the minutes, right now, it says motion by VF and seconded by RB to follow DESI recommendations, as well as federal, state, and local mandates, and revisit at appropriate times.
Now, if this motion goes down to defeat, then we still have the main motion,
Yes.
that we still have to vote on that.
which would not have this extra wording that was just added.
Or we vote as amended.
Yeah, or we vote as amended. So, all in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Motion carries.
Motion carries. So now the
Sorry,
main
your job.
motion. Main motion, okay.
Sorry.
You're the vice chair. You can say stuff. Okay, so now, are we prepared to vote as amended?
Aye.
Okay,
Yes.
all in favor of the motion as amended?
Aye.
Essentially, this is the same thing we just voted on?
It is.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Yeah.
Nay.
Okay, motion fails.
So I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that we schedule a meeting.
Ronnie, I think we gotta finish the original.
I'm so sorry.
The
What?
original motion has to, oh,
We just did that.
Yeah, we just did that.
So I would move that we schedule a further meeting. I don't want to completely say table the discussion because I think there's other parts of this that we may still discuss, but that we schedule a further meeting at the appropriate time and place, and that we publicize an additional invitation to the public that further discussion is going to happen, and we take into considerations additional information. This doesn't necessarily have to be a motion, but I'd like to see us schedule a meeting where we take in all the additional information, including what's discussed tonight. And maybe we're voting on an actual policy, maybe then we'll have a better sense of what we're voting on.
I'll second that. That was the end of your motion.
Yeah, well, I think we're just, yeah.
It's just more advisory.
Yeah, I don't know.
I started it as a
All right.
motion.
Yeah.
I started it as a motion.
I think
but
we're just, we don't need, yeah, I don't know if that's.
And if I just add that I think that a corollary issue that has been discussed that we need to help is what is our testing policy and what is our policy relative to encouraging additional vaccination or providing it? Because I don't think for some people that aren't getting vaccinated, it's a question of them not wanting to, but maybe not having access. I think we often forget that access question. We could make a choice, I saw this in DESI recommendations, that we poll people and say, if you're interested in getting a vaccine, haven't been able to, we can schedule a CHP fan to come. And so just contact our nurse if you're interested in the vaccine. And we do that as a very public statement that anyone in the community could, we would schedule CHP to come and do one. I'm part of an organization where we did that. We made it available throughout the county for people who couldn't. And CHP came and they did it in their van with a certified, they have a big health van and they did it. So that's something that is within some of the guidance recommendations that we provide that, and that we also have a testing policy so that we can get some benchmarks of what we're looking for, because obviously if we're not seeing it, that's good news, right? As Megan said.
Okay, so we'll schedule a meeting for next Monday.
Works for me.
As I recall, when we sent the survey out earlier in the summer, not everybody was necessarily going to be available on it would be the 16th. Is that, but what's,
I will not.
you were not gonna be
I am
available?
not in town next Monday. I could join by Zoom if we choose.
Okay, yeah, and I'm thinking that because of the numbers of people who may, I mean, I loved meeting in person. And I think the discussion is more real in person than, in order to, we'll have to figure out the logistics, or if we meet by Zoom, it's no problem, we can easily do that. If those of us who can meet here or somewhere else where a bigger audience can come, then we'll figure a way to Zoom you in. But why don't we plan on a meeting? Is 6:30 still a good time?
Yeah.
And we'll need to figure out, and the item on the agenda will be this, that we won't have any other items on the agenda. Clarence will publicize the fact that we're having this to get public input on moving forward, but also we'll be sharing the input from the meeting we'll have tomorrow, and I don't know that we'll have a meeting this week with the LEA or not. That probably seems a little bit quick.
I'll speak with you and Mark at the meeting, if that's
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may I have the floor? I'd like to propose a motion.
Yeah.
I'd like to propose a motion for the Lenox Public Schools to resume full-time in-person education in September for the 21-22 year.
I'll second that.
Wasn't that already mandated by, it's already been mandated by the state and DESE.
Is it mandated?
Yeah.
Yes, it is actually.
5 days a week, full.
Good point, it is actually.
Yeah.
We could finish on.
I mean,
I got nervous when I
I mean, the good news,
Yay, the mandate works, it's just not part of the.
The good news going forward is that
Could extend it a
we're gonna be
little
in
bit.
school and
Yeah.
there's no particular guideline on spacing. So those things are good. So now it's down to masking, meals, whatever.
Okay.
Now that we're just in discussion about what's on the agenda for the next meeting, would it be fair to say, just to be really clear, and maybe we would send, I'd like to see us also do the public notices go out to people that sign up for the newsletters, but maybe there could be additional email from the superintendent to all school community, but to say, on the agenda are the following: masking policies, testing policies. We talked about the issue of quarantine. And I think testing policies includes whether we do pool testing, and access to vaccinations for those who are seeking to and unable to. Does that seem like the 4 categories that we're mainly focused on?
Seems really, like unfocused in that to tackle, I think that a number of those do not actually have no bearing on actually opening the school or how the school is going to look when we open it up. Whether we can get a van for mobile testing or mobile vaccinations doesn't really impinge on the environment within each individual buildings on September 2nd. So I feel that we're going to be diluting, that we would be diluting the focus of the discussion, which really seems, I think those are great, and I think those are initiatives we should follow through on, but school's going to open. And whether we have, and I don't see how on a day-to-day basis we should, whether, I don't see how those really actually affect our decision-making process on the way school looks for kids on September 2nd.
I think they very much do affect the way that school looks on the first day of school. I'm speaking from a teacher's point of view. I would like to know what my classroom is going to look like. If we're going to be wearing masks, okay, are we going to go back to normal, getting rid of social distancing? It does matter to me as a parent, and I'm sure it matters to the teachers.
Yeah,
it might seem trivial in comparison to the big.
I didn't mention masks.
I'm not talking about masks. I'm talking about social distancing, pool testing, those where children are going to be eating their lunches on a day-to-day basis. Those things are important. They might seem trivial to some.
No, they may, but I was thinking, pool testing is something that last year we signed up for outside.
But that's because it was offered through DESI. I'm not sure that it is.
It still is.
Oh,
Yeah, there's
okay.
so a number of these things, by the way, David, when I was doing my I just got back from vacation, so I apologize, I did my homework a little bit last minute, which is actually not unusual for me, but the reality is that there's a source. If your school wants some support around getting vaccinations to your community, go here. If your school wants to talk about testing, here's our record. So I think compared to in the past when nobody could even get a test, I mean, I remember having a family member living in a multiple apartment community with positive people and they couldn't even get a test. So the idea of providing tests so that we know if the benchmarks change to put us in a more at-risk situation is connected to that. Because if the tests are showing, or the pool testing is showing that we have some positive people and an increased risk, maybe masks go on. If the tests are showing we don't, maybe masks come off. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding the matrix here, I think that's the issue, right? If we have nobody in our community that's positive, we can not wear masks, but then how do we know that's true a week from now?
You do pool
2 weeks
testing,
from
you're
now?
going to have
Right,
positive tests.
but are we gonna pool test people before school starts?
We had very.
I mean, how many did you have participate? I don't
know.
remember. Was it a decent amount?
What I was reading today says that pool testing helps you to.
Oh, really?
At its height, it did fall off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It went
That's
up
a lot.
and then it went down, but I'd say close to 300 at the peak. I think we had 3 confirmed positive tests.
And if you're knowing we don't have it,
Out of all the times you did it.
All the time we
Every
did it.
week.
right, then you've got something to rely on. Instead of the worry, which does sound hyperbolic, of what's happening in North Adams, you have actual data, right? I mean, I acknowledge that I'm not an expert on what the pool testing does or looks like, but I'd want to know, and from your meeting tomorrow, and I might want to see one of, these well-written paragraphs that say this is how we'll test. And then I might be more comfortable making a vote on a mask if I know what are we doing to monitor our community. I think that's where, if anybody's misreading this in some way that I'm like pro-mask, I'm not. I just want to make sure we have the tools in place to make sure that if something changes in our community, we're aware of it before something devastating. Or if we make a decision to have everybody masked, that all of the stakeholders are part of that decision. And that's...
I thought it was a very good list, and honestly, I think the mask is going to be the shortest part of the discussion, because now we've talked about it, we're going to have to choose one or the other, but like, in that ecosystem of your choices, I think
Yeah, the quarantine seems to be not as critical at this point. That's gonna be guidance that we get, that's gonna be told to us what we
Yeah.
have to do on that.
Dr. Glosson, do you think I'm missing anything on what should be on the agenda?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think those 4 issues make sense to me. But I agree that with each one, we're opening, pretty significant, I don't want to say can of worms because it sounds cliche, but there'll be, quite a bit of discussion, I mean, I think we think that masking is the one polarizing issue, but I think each one of these could be equally as polarizing, so. But if we want to go through that exercise, I think it's worthwhile, for sure.
I think that the masking is the critical thing. Quarantine is down the road. It's just a matter of what in terms of the pool testing, we're doing it.
Do we have a policy in place that we're continuing to do it? Because that was
Desi
not
is
clear
still
to me.
offering it.
But that's
So-
not clear to me that,
Yeah,
in other words, if we're going back to normal, which is
Yeah, we would
Mr.
have to
Cass's
adopt
word,
the testing.
to me, normal is not pool testing. So I don't,
Yeah.
normal is before COVID existed, right? So what are we doing in the meantime to
Okay,
ensure
but
safety?
but we can-
That's my concern.
But I think if that's gonna be a discussion at all, it'd be a short discussion, because we're gonna do it or not.
I currently have plans in place to continue full testing. I'm attending a webinar on either tomorrow or Wednesday of how that looks for this coming year, which they don't expect it to look that much different from last year. But it's the intention to continue that.
We want to make sure we got in with Desi offering, so we weren't closed out. So we signed up, we gave them our statement of intent that we were going to do it again, so that they'll pay for it, and all of our ducks in a row should we decide to go that way.
And I think that's important for articulation with our teaching community, and important for articulation with our parent community, that is something in place, because I'm a member of the school committee and I did not come into this meeting tonight assuming that was true. Because we have several state, local, right? Governor Baker revoked all restrictions, right? And then, so where are we? Going back to normal is before COVID was in our lives, so what does that look like? And I think that's the part of the thing that I think is
What I
important for us
think
to
would
be
be very
clear.
helpful to get before the next meeting would be the administration's thoughts about what you're going to put in place, what you'd like to put in place for fall, like your proposal for what you think things should look like before the meeting, and then we'll have that for talking points
Yes.
as we go into the meeting, because, you know, you're the full-time superintendent, although you just started and have that much time to feet on the ground, but.
Nothing like a baptism by fire.
You know, 40 hours a week is here for your use, and if you talk to the staff and get what the prevailing wisdom is right now, that might be a good starting place. And if there are things you think we should be doing that we're not doing, we certainly want to hear about that as well. So.
And we'd be happy to do that. I think the other piece, you know, that'll help also, I think, surface is, you know, something like pool testing also becomes complicated because some of our kids that are in extracurriculars would be barred from participating if they don't participate in pool testing, if that's required by other organizing bodies, and so that it gets, you know, convoluted pretty quick. So, you know, by opening up that discussion, I think, with our staff.
And the AD probably has a position on that.
Clearly.
You know.
And again, you have an issue of an age group that's eligible for a vaccine, whether people comply or not is a different conversation, and whether we mandate. I mean, some schools are actually having the conversation about whether or not mandated vaccines is a different conversation. I'm not recommending it, but it's one that's out there. And then there's the issue of the children 12 and under who are not eligible for it. So you can't even say, well, we have this protection.
Mass tried to mandate the flu vaccine for all students, and that didn't turn out so well,
So I'm going to make a suggestion that for those of us who can and choose to, that we meet here, but that it be a Zoom meeting so that people can, you know, Lauren can Zoom in, but everyone else can Zoom in too, but that we actually are physically
I've
here.
done a meeting like that once.
Do we have the ability to do that in the auditorium? Because again, I think in terms of
I
spacing.
don't know about that in the auditorium, you know, about a camera.
But we just need a big screen TV. It's just a monitor. We have them at the school. We just need a TV with internet access.
You don't want to be a big screen?
Just a laptop.
Can I just raise a question that's a procedural one? I know that's shocking.
Yeah, you're supposed to know it all.
No, this is about the issue of the policies. So there was a Governor Baker statement that said that we could meet remotely and still comply with open meeting law.
Right.
Looking at Clarence too, and then that was extended, but then so we're still under that. So therefore, when we have a hybrid meeting, Mr. Cass being by Zoom is equally present in that open meeting
Yes.
as we are physically. And we could do, because there's an old regulation that talked about teleconferencing, because we had a member who was ill.
Yeah.
And you could only do it if that person showed that they weren't available. Is it just like, it's available? You don't
I
have to
believe
have a
the
show
chairman
cause.
or whoever's in charge of the meeting, which could be you at times, has to be physically present.
Okay, there has to be a
But-
presiding person.
Yeah.
But that members can attend remotely at their
Right.
will without a prior show cause of necessity, for
Exactly.
example. Okay.
Exactly.
I think that's how it should be.
All right, so I'm suggesting that we meet here at 6:30. We'll have, but it'll be a Zoom meeting, so bring your computers if you got them. And except.
Wait a minute, we have to be on our Zoom screens?
Well,
Well, we don't know when to have the audio on.
We don't know
We just want
precisely.
like
You
one.
can't all be on Zoom in one place at a time. It'll
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
feedback.
All you would hear was each other.
Right.
No,
We
but-
just have one with Warren.
Yeah.
But our screen that Orin is on can also, or any of the people that are on can also, you can see us in the open meeting, correct?
Hopefully.
CTSB friends?
We can work that.
let's-
We'll figure it
let's
out. But
take
We'll figure it
The
out.
important point is it will be a joint meeting, a hybrid meeting.
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Will it be in this room?
Well, I'm only reluctant about downstairs because the acoustics are not great at all downstairs. You know, that's why I'd say here, I mean, I don't love the fact the room is so small,
Right.
but if we're doing it by Zoom, then it won't matter. Everyone out here could be at home.
Will you allow anyone in person?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, as capacity allows?
Because my concern is that we're gonna have a standing room only room, and then the whole point about.
They can go down to it, they can do it.
We can certainly talk about the technology later.
So should we have guidance in terms of time limits for, like, if we do get a large crowd, we should consider a certain time that each individual from the public gets to speak?
Yeah.
Whether it be
Like
1
2
minute,
minutes.
2 minutes, or something along those
I
lines.
think there is that
Because if you-
guideline somewhere.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
3
there may
minutes. It's
be,
3
right?
minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a 3
Yeah,
minute.
yeah.
So
that's
we'll
right,
just
2
have
minutes,
to
I
pay
think.
attention.
Somebody will really have to monitor that, I think,
Yeah.
just so we're
Right.
not here for 6 hours.
Is that somebody, I think, is you.
Well-
Okay, so we'll figure out the logistics, whether we're here or downstairs, what our screen's gonna look like, what we need to bring for, I have no clue.
And we could perhaps get some help from our technology people at the
From
school
Randy.
to help us to get
Does Randy
some.
work
When's our
these
due- when's
days?
our-
Is he at high school?
Yeah, he's all over. But he's stationed in high school.
All right, so I'll try to catch up with him tomorrow.
I think the concept of being in a larger space and being more accessible to the public in multiple ways does address a lot of our accessibility issues too.
Yeah.
What about the high school?
So, at this point, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
I think for that
Supper
question,
waits.
the high school.